Hello and welcome back everyone, we Weeb Online, and today I'm gonna continue the story What If Madara Was Sealed Inside Naruto Part 12. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
Night in Naruto. You've changed, Gaara declared to the Silent Night, the cacophonous festival crowd so far away that they truly felt isolated. His voice was as solemn as the sand that started to spill onto the ground around him from the thin scabbard on his back. You're different from when I first saw you in your academy, even from when you fought against the Akatsuki in the preliminary rounds. You have the same eyes that I do. Filled with hatred and death, they long for strength, just like mine. Your eyes tell me how badly you wish to kill those who put you through the hell called loneliness. In the face of his odd opponent, with whom he had scarcely spoken previously, Naruto fought the first impulse to laugh. How could this Sand Genin be aware of Naruto's animosity? He remembered the first time he had stood in front of the red-haired ninja before their first test, somewhere in the academy, before he opened his mouth. Gaara had been anticipating his arrival. They barely had time to speak before Gaara's identity as a Jinchuriki was revealed by one of the Akatsuki teams, led by the charismatic ninja Masahiro. The Jinchuriki of the Sand. Gazing intently into Gaara's pale green eyes, Naruto was shocked to discover that he had reached the same conclusion in a matter of seconds. His eyes resembled Gaara's: anger, grief, hatred, and retaliation, stuffed full to overflowing. The murderous intent that radiated from within was barely contained. Naruto finally made the decision to reply, "I have changed," his hateful tone alien to his own ears. "I've grown stronger," he said after pausing to consider his feelings. "I've harnessed the hatred within rather than try and run away from it. Perhaps we're more alike than I thought." The sand around him on the rooftop was still stirring, so Gaara crossed his arms. "You and I are Jinchuriki, relics that our villages wish to be rid of entirely, but cannot risk upsetting the power balance of the ninja world. So why do we exist? In order to exist, you need a purpose. To exist without a purpose is the same as being dead. I'm curious as to what purpose you have named for yourself." Naruto felt calm as his Mangeku's evil chakra continued to flow through his body, even though he had no idea if Gaara was going to attack him. "My purpose is to rid my village of the stinking corruption that plagues it. My hatred has given me the strength to do it. And what about you? How have you managed to deal with the loneliness that comes from being hated for the demon inside of you?" Gaara finally answered, "I have come to the conclusion that I will love only myself and fight for only myself," as the sand abruptly stopped moving and the night became silent except for their voices. "If all other people exist to magnify that love, then there is no more splendid universe than this one. My purpose is to exist. My existence will not vanish. I will simply extinguish the existence of all those who stand before me and, in doing so, verify my own self-love." For someone who had the kanji for love tattooed on his forehead, perhaps that was appropriate. Naruto could see through his red eyes that Gaara's body was pulsing with a startling amount of golden chakra, which was coming from a seal that was not too dissimilar from his own. How could Gaara so effortlessly access the tailed beast's chakra within himself? Was the tailed beast able to manipulate the sand because of his chakra? Other than Gaara, was the demon in charge of the sand? Love of yourself can only get you so far, Naruto shot back, silently challenging himself by crossing his own arms. Eventually there will come a time when you stand before someone who is stronger than you. Who will you love then, if you find yourself beaten in battle? "No one has ever beaten me," Gaara said icily, in an emotionless voice. "My existence is stronger than anyone else's." He couldn't contain his laughter. "Ha, then you have much to learn, Gaara. If we end up fighting in the finals, I will show you that my hatred is far stronger than any love you have for yourself. Your love will falter, but my hatred will persist. I've already persisted through a hell unlike anything you've ever imagined. My wrathful eyes will bend the world around my will." The red-haired Jinchuriki was surrounded by eerily rising tendrils of sand that had started to stir once more. "The finals mean nothing to me. You stand before me now, ready to be consumed. When your blood drips and soaks through my sand, I will remain alive and love myself even more. Mother, don't you agree?" Naruto observed that, similar to what the spiritual chakra of Mangekyou was doing within him, the golden chakra within his adversary started to cycle up into his brain in frightening quantities. Gaara appeared to be out of control. He briefly pondered whether this was how the Mangekyou would have operated inside of him if he hadn't already acquired the eternal Mangekyu Sharingan. He controlled his hatred. It gave him energy, but it didn't govern him. Milliseconds before a spear of sand sped past his unflinching face, Naruto asked, "You really can't wait?" He shrugged and rolled his neck. "So be it. Look into my eyes and I will show you just how powerful my hatred is." "Wait, Naruto. You fool, if you try to use." Naruto quickly stopped Madara's chakra from getting to him and pushed more chakra into his eyes than he had ever done before. Like a dam bursting, all of the hatred emanating from his spiritual chakra, his eternal Mangekyo, flooded into his vision. In his visions, he recalled the same feeling he had experienced when he had been held captive in front of Itachi. His lips held a word that begged to be spoken. His crimson, menacing eyes met Gaara's. He whispered, "Koto Amatsukami," as more sand blasted out at him, transferring all of his chakra and will into Gaara's head. In an instant, all of the enormous quantities of sand that were flying in his direction fell to the ground without causing any harm. Naruto continued to force his will and chakra into Gaara's mind, just as he had done with the Sharingan Genjutsu. However, this time, he was using his more powerful Mangekyo chakra, which was filled with rage. "What have you?" Gaara stammered out, standing motionless, his body trembling a little. Instead of waiting for him to finish, Naruto proceeded to pour his chakra and will into Gaara's mind, destroying the golden chakra like a candle as extinguished by a strong wind. Naruto suddenly experienced the same feeling he had had an hour before when he had communicated with Madara by entering his own subconscious. However, he sensed a different chakra that resembled his own demons and the alien presence of Gaara's mind instead of Madara's and the Nine Tails. With a final push of evil chakra, Naruto plunged into Gaara's mind, not waiting for him to escape and fight back. Uchiha Sasuke compound. Sasuke's hand instantly went to his kunai pouch, but before he could grasp the metal handle that was taped, another hand grabbed hold of his and held him there. Gurren hissed at him from the side, her gaze still fixed on Orochimaru. "Don't," she said. "If Lord Orochimaru wanted us dead, we would already be dead. There's no point." The silence was broken once more by spine-tingling laughter before Sasuke could even pull his arm back and answer. Orochimaru laughed and walked slowly toward them, hands casually in his pockets. "HN," he said. "Very astute, Gurren-chan. Like I said, I'm only here for a little chat, there's no reason for you two to be so uneasy." After a while, Sasuke was able to escape by pulling his arm away from Gurren and asking, "Uneasy? Of course we should be uneasy. How do you keep managing to walk around the Leaf Village when our security is as tight as ever before? How come no one's found you yet?" Orochimaru laughed once more and kept moving forward until he was right in front of Gurren and Sasuke. With a strange smile on his face, he extended both of his hands until he was stroking their cheeks. "I'm stronger than any ninja in this entire village. Do you think anyone really wishes to find me?" Even though Sasuke was trembling with fear and rage, he dared not move while Orochimaru patted their heads and laughed. Now fear had frozen his body. Orochimaru was probably the strongest person in the entire village, and the Sannin was correct. Sasuke would be dead before he could make it to the wall of the compound, even if he fled now. Nobody was able to save him. Orochimaru thankfully retreated, sitting on a mat in front of them, and carried on laughing. "I'm only kidding," he said jokingly, gesturing for them to take a seat. "The Leaf Ninja are trying very hard to find me. But I'm very good at not being found. Do you think I just woke up one morning and decided to abandon the village? Of course not. I left after months of preparation and planning, establishing hidden safe houses and security holes that I can exploit, planting those loyal to me in certain positions to feed me intel. The Amekage didn't choose me to be the commander of the intelligence regiment without reason." As he continued to gesture for them to do so, Sasuke and Gurren sat down slowly across from the renegade Sannin. It's not as though there was a way out. Their glances were nervously exchanged. Gurren had informed him that even Orochimaru was not safe in this situation because she had defected from Akatsuki. After they sat down, Sasuke finally plucked up the courage to ask, "What do you want with us?" While trying to keep his hands from shaking. "You said there's something you wanted to say to the both of us." Orochimaru nodded, his spectral face still adorned with the ubiquitous smirk. "Yes, I had originally wished to meet with you, Sasuke-kun, but I was happy to see that Gurren was with you as well. You two are in a similar situation, after all." Sasuke gave Gurren another quick sidelong glance before scowling and moving forward again. To what extent was Orochimaru aware of their desire to murder Itachi? How could he possibly care? Orochimaru turned his predatory eyes to the blue-haired girl sitting next to Sasuke and asked, Gurren, in a tone that was a little mocking. Have you told Sasuke about our relationship yet, or will I have to start from scratch? It's strange for you to be so friendly with the person I ordered you to kill. Sasuke was forced to take a sharp breath and turn to face his new friend, in shock and rage. Had Orochimaru given the order to murder him? What in the world? No. Gurren snapped out of his reverie and turned to look at Sasuke anxiously. I haven't, Sasuke, she said, pausing and averting her eyes in embarrassment. Orochimaru met with me before the second phase of the exams started. He ordered me to test my strength against you by killing you in the woods in a one-on-one fight. But I would have tried to do that without his orders anyway after I first met you at the ramen bar. And obviously I've stopped trying to kill you. Sasuke inhaled deeply and tried to control his rage. Right, I get it. You tried to kill me numerous times in the past, but I'm over that now. But you're not still taking his orders, are you? Orochimaru nearly killed my team in the woods. Gurren said definitively, no, I'm not, and returned her focus to the amused commander. I stopped taking any orders from him the moment he showed me that he had deserted Akatsuki. He's a dead man, anyway. You do realize that the Amekage is going to kill you, right? Orochimaru chose to intervene with one of his eerie chuckles. As though it were a trivial matter, he said, HN, Gurren-chan, didn't you hear what I just said? I didn't leave the Leaf Village on a whim, only after meticulous planning and knowing that I could exploit its security flaws whenever I wanted. Why then do you think I would abandon Akatsuki without taking the same careful measures? Gurren did not believe it. She questioned doubtfully, not believing the former commander's laid-back demeanor. What measures could you possibly take against the Amekage? Unlike the Leaf, Lord Amekage has the resources and the power to kill you, and he definitely wouldn't let someone of your position threaten the organization from the outside. Orochimaru calmly answered, and yet here I sit, demonstrating his presence in front of them by wriggling his fingers. Alive, very much alive, even a god has his own limitations, Gurren-chan, and the Amekage is no different. I didn't leave the Akatsuki until I was sure that I knew those limitations and could exploit them, hence, I am still alive. He looked at Sasuke, his eyes cold and yellow. He clarified, my purpose of joining the Akatsuki was always for my own benefit, but Sasuke was only interested in getting out of this room alive and telling the Hokage about it. The Amekage knew this, but he needed me to build his intelligence regiment and research division so much that he was willing to take me in regardless. But there is only one outcome that will ever happen when you choose to hold a snake tightly to your chest, no matter how gentle your touch. You get bitten. It's in my very nature. He returned his attention to Gurren. I built the Amekage, the strongest intelligence network and research facility of any great village. In turn, I was able to use his resources for my own machinations, and I at long last achieved what I have been so fervently searching for. He nearly missed it completely because it was so swift, but his snake-like eyes swiveled to Sasuke's bitten neck before grinning and turning away. For a moment, he felt the curse seal on his pulse, but maybe that was just his imagination. Or was that merely a coincidence? In a mysterious declaration, Orochimaru said, the Amekage is no longer the only ninja with control over life and death, as his toothy grin became wider. But none of that truly concerns the two of you. What you need to understand is that I am the only ninja who has ever betrayed Akatsuki and lived this long enough to tell about it. His eyes widened toward Gurren. Perhaps you wish to join me. When Gurren gasped, Sasuke was forced to twitch uneasily in his chair. I know you two wish to kill Itachi, the murderer of your families. He's a part of Akatsuki as you well know by now. Gurren-chan, surely you won't continue to work in the same organization as the one who slew your parents. He observed his friend firmly grasping her shirt hems. She exchanged a worried look with him and seemed to want to answer, but she refrained. Ha, you can trust me, my dear, the Sannin said. I'm obviously not going to rat you out to the Amekage. There's a reason why I told you that Itachi is going to be a part of the organization, just like there is a reason why I wished to watch you fight against Sasuke. You're talented, you have an excellent bloodline limit, and now you have no home to return to. His gaze returned to Sasuke. Your Uchiha bloodline limit is even more ancient and amazing, and your potential to use it is perhaps only mirrored by your older brother, even if your clan were still alive. You both are talented. I have need of such talent. But that talent is yet unrefined. I would have you both abandon your villages and follow me. Gurren was the first to reply, and Sasuke was a second too late to reject the proposal outright. When she asked hesitantly, "What's in it for us?" Sasuke choked on his tongue and turned to face her, perplexed. Was this guy's opinion really something she was thinking about? Orochimaru grinned even more broadly. "I will give you strength. I will give you the power that you need in order to kill Itachi. The power that you won't find here in the Leaf Village doing pointless bureaucratic missions, or in Akatsuki spending most of your time leading the armor regiment and doing Kimimura's menial tasks." When Sasuke was confronted with the truth he had been so desperately trying to avoid, his retort froze in his throat once more. He spent most of his days performing pointless D, C, and B rank missions until he was finally promoted to Jonin, so how could he ever hope to surpass Itachi in strength? Who could possibly train Itachi to be that strong if he was already stronger than most of the villagers? Someone with Itachi's strength, of course. However, no one in the Leaf was even at that level, possibly with the exception of the Hokage. The former commander's proposal was not yet complete. "Gurren-chan, if you return to the Akatsuki with the intent of killing Itachi, the Amekage will likely find out and kill you before you ever get the chance. If you abandon the Akatsuki on your own, he will certainly find and kill you before the end of the week. I am offering you protection." Sasuke said. "We don't need your help," but his voice wasn't nearly as convincing as he had hoped. "Weren't you just telling us about the danger of being so close to a snake? I don't want to get bitten, and neither does Gurren." Orochimaru laughed at his hasty and unpersuasive answer. He narrowed his eyes at him and said, "I figured you would be much harder to convince, Sasuke-kun, without giving up. That is part of the reason why I gave you that curse mark." Now it was Gurren's turn to stare at him bewildered. "Curse mark?" she inquired anxiously, unsure of what that meant. "What curse mark? What did he do to you, Sasuke?" "Oh, you'll find out soon enough," Orochimaru said on Sasuke's behalf. He got out of his chair slowly and rose to his feet above them. "There will come a time when your own power isn't enough, and then you will find out what true power feels like. You are fighting Kimimaro in the first round, are you not? HN, perhaps that time will come sooner than you expect." They were forced to turn around as the Sannin moved in between them and started to walk idly toward the room's exit. "Once you get a taste of my power, Sasuke, you will understand exactly what I have to offer you. And Gurren, if you are not convinced that I have found a way to evade the Amekage, then just wait until after the Chunin exams are finished. The Amekage will most certainly confront me while he is invited into the village." His long hair whipped around behind him as the cool night wind blew in as he opened the door and turned around. "I just wished to let you know of my offer now, ahead of time. When next we meet, I believe that you two will be more receptive of me. If you both truly wish to kill Itachi, then training underneath me will be the only way to realistically achieve that goal. Sasuke, you will have had a taste of my power by then, and Gurren, you will have been witness to the wrath of the Amekage when it comes to the matter of betraying Akatsuki." Orochimaru then went out into the night. They both slumped their shoulders in exhaustion and released the tension-filled breaths they had been holding. Sasuke and Gurren looked at each other, and they both realized that they would not be sleeping for long. Earlier that day, Hinata had made the decision to leap to the apartment complex's rooftop in order to express her feelings after pacing in front of Naruto's front door for approximately a mile. She already knew he wasn't inside, but it was tempting to use her spare key to open the door and check for him. She remembered that she had a Byakugan that could see through walls, but it had taken her some time. What on earth happened to him? Why had he not returned home yet? Before leaving the ramen stand, hadn't he promised to see her? Why did he ask that strange question about Itachi's motivation for killing the Uchiha, and why was he so angry with Jiraiya in the first place? Where had he been for the past week, of course? Was that how long he'd been avoiding her? Did she try too hard to cultivate a romantic relationship with him? Was that not how he liked her? Was her initial love for him simply too great? Hinata had made the decision to try to relax on the rooftop by taking a deep breath before jumping off into the night and sobbing in exasperation. She ended up approaching the flowers, little trees, and potted plants that decorated the roof because someone in the complex had made a miniature garden. As usual, she discovered that she felt a sense of peace and tranquility that she couldn't find anywhere else when she was outside and surrounded by nature, particularly trees and plants. There was always a garden where she could unwind. She even spent her leisure time planting her own in the Senju compound for this reason. Hinata took another deep breath and sat down in the middle of the rooftop plants. Her heart rate immediately started to decrease, and she gradually started to feel calm again, something she had not experienced during the stressful day. Everything would be fine. She would be given an explanation when Naruto returned, which would happen eventually. Naturally, Naruto had a valid reason for abandoning her for a week without informing her. Naturally, Naruto loved her even more, and in years to come, they would establish a new clan and move into the Senju compound. All she needed to do was wait. She kept thinking about her battle with Neji in the preliminary round. She had been filled with such a wonderful, calming, and powerful energy when she had been slammed against the wall and exposed to the forest behind her, fearing for her life. It was a lot stronger than the calm she was feeling now, but it felt similar. She couldn't stop wondering. As she sat motionless in the garden, hours and minutes passed without her noticing. She was becoming less and less concerned about Naruto with each second that went by. Rather, she felt the comforting certainty that everything would work out in the end. A certain power accompanied that reassurance. She sensed energy emanating from somewhere, but she couldn't pinpoint it. Instead, she felt as though she was taking in energy from the environment. Could that have happened? She eventually experienced a calmness that was beyond comprehension. Everything would be all right. What difference did it make whether Naruto returned tonight? He was living his own life, and it was totally acceptable if he didn't want to involve her. Love was a transient feeling. Life would continue. Why should she be upset with him for following his wishes? Anger was another ephemeral feeling. Life would continue even if Naruto eventually came to despise her and left the village as she had imagined in her dreams. She might be just as content with her without Naruto, and... She gasped and sprang to her feet, breathing quickly and shaking her head to shake off whatever trance she had just entered. Those thoughts. How could that have happened? How could she possibly have such a thought? Nothing could be further from the truth than to be content if Naruto left her. What was she thinking about? Suddenly, as she looked down at her hands, she felt as powerful as she had been during those fleeting moments of fighting Neji. She could feel the energy of the surrounding nature pouring straight into her, and she thought she could will the plants to do anything she wanted if she could just use her chakra to reach out. Looking around, she was surprised to see that the trees and plants were all much fuller and taller than she remembered. It appeared as though some of them were still growing. The once small garden now occupied the majority of the rooftop. The flowers were all in full bloom, and vines were swiftly spreading out around the thicker tree branches. I don't understand, she trailed off to herself, but as she pushed those unsettling and distant thoughts from her mind, she felt the power ebbing away quickly. She cherished Naruto. If he were to leave her, she would be devastated, and she felt guilty for even considering it, even for a split second. She felt as though her heart and mind were once again her own after the power left her in just 1 minute. The plants surrounding her appeared to let out a mournful sigh and went motionless once more. Although she didn't fully comprehend what had just transpired, she was aware that she needed to discuss this with Naruto as soon as possible. Naruto. Naruto opened his eyes to discover that he was floating in front of a green ball of energy, which was unlike anything he had ever seen. He had somehow entered Gaara's mind using his Koto Amatsukami power, and he was now staring at what was probably a chakra representation of Gaara's brain. There appeared to be a blank space between this region and another far-off realm that resembled a distant desert when looking down below. The tailed beast inside Gaara was most likely located there, if he had to guess. According to Naruto's recollection of his studies, the one-tailed demon was a resident of the Sand Village. At all costs, he wanted to stay out of that area. Naruto floated closer to the green orb of chakra with his own will alone, but it was larger than Naruto himself up close. Madara's warning made more sense to him now. He didn't know what he was doing at the moment, but he was determined to try something. Or risk being crushed by whatever sand Gaara threw at him. He could actually see some images flashing around inside the orb, swirling around, and appearing for a brief moment as he got closer. Naruto, having run out of options, extended his hand and pushed some chakra into. Giddy with the prospect of trying something new and captivated by the knife's sharp edge, Naruto held it out in front of him. He wanted to know what it felt like, even if it was made to appear unpleasant by others. He lowered the blade in the direction of his exposed palm. He thrust down quickly, and stabbed down, and... swish! Sand materialized out of thin air to block the blade just before it could pierce his palm. He muttered to himself, "It's no use," as he withdrew the knife and observed the sand gradually vanishing into thin air. The sand always stops it. I don't understand why. He turned when he heard movement behind him and saw Yoshimaru enter the room through the open door. Yoshimaru approached him with a warm smile. As he reached over to remove the knife from his grasp, He whispered, "What are you doing there, Gaara? You're not trying to hurt yourself, are you?" Naruto frowned regretfully and let the knife fall from his grasp. He wished to avoid angering Yashimaru. With genuine bewilderment, he looked up at his guardian and asked, "What is pain? I don't think I understand why these other people scream when they are hurt." Yashimaru had a constant smile. He answered, "Pain is something you feel when you are hurt, Gaara," but it appeared that he was having trouble putting it into words. "It's really hard to describe it unless you've felt it. It's like an aching in your body that makes you feel very unpleasant. It makes you want to stop whatever is causing it." Naruto raised one of his hands to his chest while glancing down at them. He replied, clinging to his clothes, I think I understand a little. My chest, right here, it aches sometimes when I'm alone. When people run away from me and call me a monster, it aches, and I always want that feeling to stop." "Is that pain?" He nodded, and so did Yashimaru. Slowly, he started to explain, "There are different types of pain. There is physical pain, which causes you to bleed, and emotional pain from the heart." Abruptly, he reached for the knife and carefully cut across his own finger. As a thin line of blood started to emerge, Naruto gasped. Yashimaru explained, "Physical pain may hurt," while pulling a bandage from his back pocket. He wrapped his finger up quickly. "But it can be cured with medicine and time. Pain from the heart, that's much more complicated. But I think it can be cured too, Gaara." Yashimaru turned away with an odd look. Naruto followed the gaze to a picture of his mother that was close by. "With love, Gaara, that sort of pain can only be cured with love." "Love? What was love? Your mother loved you, Gaara," Yashimaru told him. "She continues to do so, which is why the sand." It was like one of his shadow clones dispersing and all of the memories flooding back to him, but even then, those were his memories, and his clones were just copies of him. Naruto opened his eyes again in front of Gaara's mind with a gasp. Holy hell, that was one of the strangest things he had ever experienced before. He had just lived through a memory, not even like watching a movie, but as if he had experienced it himself. This was a completely different feeling to be inundated with the memories and thought patterns of someone different like Gaara. After a brief moment of hesitation, he floated up to another part of the giant mind, where various images swirled around him. Reaching forward, he... "Watch out, the demon boy is here." Something that looked like a kickball appeared floating down from the sky on a platform of sand as Naruto, or rather Gaara, held out his hands. It landed gently in his arms, and he held it out in front of him like a peace offering. "Hold on, I was just trying to get this back to you," he begged, holding up the ball as if it demonstrated his good intentions. "You're ready." Pushing the ball to the ground, Gaara tossed it toward the group of children standing apart from him, hoping with all his heart that they would see this as a gesture of goodwill and understand that he wasn't a demon, but a child, like them, and that he could be loved, just like. Oh no, it was touched by the demon child. The group dispersed to allow the ball to roll straight past them after one of the children yelled at him, "Now we're going to have to get a new ball." "Many thanks, demon." His words were stuck in his throat, and he felt a sharp pain in his chest. "And no, really, I'm not, I just want to play with you guys, and..." "Demon, get lost." They all turned away from him and started to leave after hearing another voice yell at him, saying, "Great, now we have to find something else to do. Does anyone have any suggestions?" "Maybe, I was thinking." He blinked quickly, trying not to cry aloud, and his heart felt like it was leaking something hot and burning. Why was he treated this way by everyone? He never asked to be born this way, and he never did anything to deserve it. He tried to be kind to people every day, all he wanted was friends and people to care about him. Why was his chest hurting so much? A howling anger that sliced through him like the wind suddenly surged through him from the seal on his stomach, pushing through his body, past his heart, and into his mind. This was unfair, and it had never been fair. He deserved love and friendship. Why did no one else love him? Why did everyone avoid him? He knew that all he wanted was to be friends with other people, and he knew that everyone else was acting so strangely. He knew that he was just a normal kid, not a monster, deep down. Why couldn't anyone else see that? Why were they so awful? They were the demons. He just wanted to crush them. If these people really wanted him to be a demon, perhaps he would just show them what a real demon looks like. He felt more and more control over the sand surrounding him, and the howling energy pushed through his body. A boy with dark red hair, much darker than Gaara's, had broken away from the group and was approaching him. he was most likely coming over here to further insult him, but he wouldn't have the opportunity. Hey, listen kid, I just talked to. Oh, was it his mother? Was she telling him to show this boy what his pain felt like? Gaara screamed out as the energy inside him threatened to explode. His anger commanded blood. A tendril of sand erupted from the ground and struck the boy so forcefully that he flew into the air and rolled back to the group of children behind him. He reached forward and pushed his will into the sand surrounding him. The playground was suddenly filled with screams. Run! Run! Everyone! We are under attack from the demon! For the first time, the group appeared to look at him in genuine fear as he strode forward, grinning, before turning and running away from him, not quickly enough. Unfortunately, the red-haired boy he had previously struck was unable to catch up quickly enough and was slow to get up. Sand leapt out of the ground and grabbed the boy's leg before he could catch up, and as he pushed his will into the ground once more, the boy fell hard to the ground, and Gaara began slowly dragging him back with his own will. Hold on, assistance! The boy shouted out, though only a few of the other kids even stopped running to turn around and look. Please, I. With a satisfying crunch, the sand wrapped around the boy's leg instantly constricted and crushed everything inside it, and the boy screamed out in horror and agony as blood shot out through the cracks of the sand. Gaara had heard enough insults for one day, and it seemed that these kids were finally showing him the respect he deserved out of fear. They would feel pain, just as he was feeling pain. Mother wanted more blood, more. He would have it. It felt good to feel the warmth of the blood somehow through the sand. Gaara. The tendril of sand that was creeping up his captive's body was destroyed when the familiar voice of Yoshimaru yelled from somewhere nearby. Gaara, do you know who this is? What in the world? What have you done? Quote. As he drew his hand back and opened his eyes once more, Naruto felt the same intense sadness and hatred that Gaara had felt still seeping into his mind. Wow, even worse, he could clearly feel the warmth of the blood seeping through, and the joy Gaara had felt when that kid's leg had crunched under the sand. He had to fight the urge to gag as he slowly retreated from the giant floating mind, and his own memories and feelings came back under control. Even though that experience was unsettling, he honestly couldn't say that it wasn't familiar because he had experienced something very similar when he first awakened the Mangekyo inside of his visions. The joy he had felt after killing Itachi, Sasuke, Hinata, and all the other villagers who had been tormenting him for weeks. Naruto distinctly recalled finding the hatred within himself, his own hatred, with Gaara. The rage seemed much more uncontrollable and alien than the Mangekyo's, as if Gaara had no choice but to lash out against that poor child. Perhaps there was a way to learn about Gaara's strengths and weaknesses, or perhaps there was a way to force his own will into Gaara's mind and force him to obey his commands, but he didn't feel like spending the next 10 years or so reliving Gaara's messed up life. He felt that this memory was much more recent than the previous two, so he thought he might as well see what this area might mean. Naruto seemed to be drawn to something, and he floated up to a different part of the mind that seemed to be emitting a lot of stress and tension. He reached forward with his arm once more, and... Are you aware of the plan? Leaning coolly against the wall beside his blood relatives Temari and Kankuro, Gaara gazed forward at his sensei. They had just been informed that his true purpose in sending him to something as trivial as the Chunin exams was to finally use him as the weapon he was meant to be, so whatever. More blood to appease mother. His sensei said, "You're the most important piece out of all of this," emphasizing the gravity of the situation. It's likely that Akatsuki and, worse, the Amekage will be present. You don't need to worry about that, though. Lord Orochimaru and the Kazekage ought to have a strategy in place to deal with them. All you need to do is make sure that it doesn't take over you until... He felt a shrieking wind engulf Gaara's mind, consuming every aspect of thought and memory, and preventing Naruto from getting any closer to the more recent memories. Whatever was going down in the seal that contained the one tail, it wasn't good. The demon's spiritual chakra had obviously been sealed away within Gaara, because so much of the chakra was flowing up to his mind. Suddenly, Naruto was pushed backwards away from Gaara's mind as a burst of golden chakra that surged upwards and filled the space, and he took a moment to appreciate that he didn't have the same problem. But there was no use in trying to stay up here when Gaara's entire mind was consumed in the golden chakra, so Naruto used the demon's chakra as a tether and flew downward with his will, tracing the howling evil back to its source. He felt the source of the chakra that flowed upwards, the realm of wherever the demon was sealed inside. Could he enter it, just like he had entered Gaara's mind and his own subconscious earlier that day? The realm of Shukaku. Naruto landed gently on the desert floor of Gaara's subconscious, the realm of the one-tailed beast, where sand mounds extended as far as the eye could see. It was an endless desert with no relief, with the demon at its center controlling the howling winds. Unlike his own subconscious, Naruto had no control over this realm, so he started forward with some trepidation to the enormous cage he could see as a far-off mountain. Hours passed before he finally started to approach the One-Tail's prison, and as he got closer, the cage grew larger and larger until he had to bend his neck back to see the top. In the sewers of his own mind, the Nine Tails loomed ominously behind what appeared to be secure prison bars, while Madara seemed to roam around as he pleased. To his great dismay, he found that the One Tail was much more like Madara than the Nine Tails in terms of the prison that held him. Broken and battered, but most importantly, it contained no captive demon, the cage was empty. When Naruto sensed that something terrible was about to happen, he poured as much chakra into his legs as he could and leapt as high as he could into the air. Not a second too late, after feeling the realm around him tremble like an earthquake. Boom! Below him, the desert exploded with wind and sand, and a giant sand paw, the One Tail, grew upwards into the air toward him, each finger adorned with pointed claws sharp enough to cut through mountains. If Gaara's memories were any guide, he had a suspicion that this demon wanted nothing more than to soak its sand with his blood. He needed to think fast because he could leave this world completely, but he felt that there had to be another way. The arm was rising faster while he was only slowing down. Using chakra in his arms to increase his strength beyond human limits, he threw a kunai as far behind him as he could without pausing, making sure his chakra was in contact with the kunai and forming his signature move, the substitution technique, without the use of seals. It seemed as though the entire arm was composed of moving sand. He crashed into the center of the paw without any issues, but as soon as the demon sensed his presence, he watched the enormous claws close in as he sank into the sand below. By the time he could even look back down, the towering paw had reached him. In an instant, Naruto switched with the kunai, and as the claws crushed where he had been moments before, he was able to safely sail away while maintaining the momentum of the thrown projectiles. Ha 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 ha. Naruto covered his ears as he continued to move through the air after hearing a piercing laugh that sliced through the desert winds like a spear. Then, as the One Tail emerged from the desert floor, a larger explosion occurred, demonstrating just how enormous a creature had to be to have an arm that big. When he finally landed, Naruto used chakra in his legs to prevent any damage, and he ended up skidding for a while in the thankfully soft sand before using more chakra to finally stop his movement and look back up at the looming mountain of a creature. It looked like a tanuki. So, his books and their illustrations had been accurate after all, but nothing could truly compare to standing before a real demon. Naruto was rapidly reconsidering whether there was any benefit to staying after the One-Tailed had completely surfaced from the desert. He had learned from Madara that the Sharingan could control tailed beasts, but looking at the demon now, he realized that he didn't know how to use Kotoamatsukami nearly well enough to even try, and at the moment, he just wanted to escape this place alive. Hey, blood, blood, blood to me. The One-Tail began to breathe in an uncontrollably large amount of air, so much so that Naruto, who was about a mile away from the creature, actually felt drawn towards its mouth as the demon howled out again with another laugh, narrowing its golden eyes down at Naruto. Without waiting to see what it intended to do with so much air, he used his Mangeku's chakra to swiftly extricate himself from the demon's domain. Naruto, stop bothering me. He was still standing across from him on the rooftop, encircled by the sand he had made around himself, when Gaara yelled at him in a voice full of pure hatred. That was the creature that Gaara had sealed inside him. It wasn't even caged. Its chakra poured up to Gaara's brain with hardly any filter, and Naruto had to pause to shake his head and take in his surroundings. In the end, he hadn't even been able to properly place any sort of command in Gaara's mind. It was taking all he could right now to even hold the Jinchuriki in place. Using that technique had taken a lot more chakra than he had anticipated, ending with him feeling as though he might actually fall to his knees for a brief moment. One was that Kotoamatsukami was able to read people's memories and enter their minds in addition to using his will to control them. Second, the Leaf was at much greater risk than any of them realized because Gaara was part of some kind of conspiracy with Orochimaru, and the cage was complicit. Thirdly, the One Tail was not as safe inside Gaara as the Nine Tails were. In fact, it seemed as though the demon was about to erupt at any moment, which might be precisely what Orochimaru and the cage desired. Holy sh*t, the Hokage had to know about this right away. Trying to sound as assured as he had before entering the Jinchuriki's head, Naruto called out to Gaara, "Sorry, change of plans," saying, "I'm not going to risk fighting you here. You'll simply need to meet me in the finals if you want to compare your life to mine. Naruto shoved chakra into his legs and leapt away as quickly and far as he could, going straight for the Hokage's tower before Gaara could react or flee. Sasuke and Gurren had rushed straight to the Hokage's tower after spotting Orochimaru in order to report it to the Anbu desk or the garrison desk. To his surprise, and he had had a lot of surprises that day, they encountered Naruto at the tower's entrance that evening. "Hey, Naruto," Sasuke yelled, "hold up a sec, we're coming in too," as he saw his friend approaching the main entrance of the tower. When they were standing across from one another, Naruto did pause and turned to wait for them to jump beside him, but his eyes were not happy or patient with them. Astonished by his friend's unusually pessimistic tone, Naruto spat out, "I don't have time for games, Sasuke," completely ignoring Gurren's presence. What was wrong? "I have news that the Hokage needs to hear immediately." His brother, who had blonde hair, turned around and strode through the doorway, and Sasuke turned to look at Gurren, who looked just as puzzled as he did. You do realize that he wasn't always that abrupt. She raised an eyebrow in question, probably recalling their previous encounter at the ramen bar, where he had been making jokes about their relationship. Sasuke let out a sigh and continued to follow him, but by the time he reached the doors, Naruto had already passed the first reporting desk and was beginning to climb the stairs in the back, and he and Gurren had to jog to try to catch up. "Naruto, I don't know what's up with you, but we also have something that needs to be reported," Sasuke yelled again as he stood behind him on the stairway, still gasping for air. "We're here for that reason." When they arrived at the top of the stairs to the next floor, where there was an office for reporting to the Anbu, Sasuke expected Naruto to enter, but his friend continued up the stairway without hesitation, skipping every other step as he walked silently upward. "Hold on," Sasuke yelled from behind once more. "Won't you first report it to the Anbu or the chain of command?" With a tone of disbelief, he inquired, "You're not just going to storm into the Hokage's office, are you? You'll most likely get him, and he might not even be there." Ignoring his remarks, Naruto hurried up the stairway, skipping each floor until he reached the top. Yes, this fool was likely planning to storm into the Hokage's office, knowing full well that he might be imprisoned for it, and that the guard would probably not let him in the first place because no one, especially a genin, could just walk into the highest-ranking ninja's office without an appointment. When she finally caught up to him at the top of the stairs, Gurren said, "Well, we did see Lord Orochimaru. If Naruto is going to seek an audience with the Hokage, we might as well try and go with him," Gurren said. He tried to explain to her that there is a proper chain of people to report incidents to, but he couldn't help but scoff. "I don't know how things work in the Akatsuki," he said. "Without a valid appointment and outside of duty hours, you cannot simply walk into the Hokage's office and..." As the guard in the hallway in front of the Hokage's office moved aside to let Naruto enter, he trailed off and looked forward in wonder. What on earth? Sasuke and Gurren ran ahead and reached the guard as he shut the door behind Naruto. Sasuke turned to the Chunin and said, "Excuse me, sir," turning to face them. The Chunin gazed down at the two of them and shook his head as though he were dazed. "We're with him. We have something we need to report to the Hokage as well." With an amused snort, the Chunin gazed at them. As if they were fools for even bothering him, he asked them, "Do you have an appointment? The Hokage is in an important meeting right now. If you don't have an appointment with him, which I know you don't because I have his schedule right here with me and his last appointment was hours ago, then go down to the first floor and check in with the garrison desk to schedule one for later this week." "What? We're with Naruto," Sasuke exclaimed, gesturing to the door. "This is an emergency, we need to report to the Hokage immediately." The Chunin replied, "I don't care who you're with," in a tone that seemed to bother him. "If it's an emergency, then go meet with the desk and they will radio it into the appropriate people. You're a genin. Don't act like you don't know the proper procedure for God's sake." Sasuke and Gurren exchanged a perplexed glance. Sasuke turned back to the Chunin and said, "I just saw you let Naruto in," with astonishment. "We have an emergency as well, why can't you let us in like you did for him?" The guard appeared just as perplexed. "I just told you what to do, dimwits. I don't care if you're a Uchiha, follow the proper procedures or I'll file a report on you. I haven't let anyone through these doors since Lord Jiraiya came an hour ago. Maybe if you become one of the Sannin you can come talk to me about impromptu meetings. Don't play stupid with me." Sasuke and Gurren exchanged astonished glances. What on earth was happening? Naruto. There he is, please come and have a seat, Naruto. Naruto was shocked to see the Hokage seated across from his sensei, Jiraiya, at the sofa and side table designated for tea and visitors when the door shut behind him. Apparently a third cup had already been poured for him. Jiraiya here didn't believe me when I told him that you'd make it up here without a problem, the Hokage remarked, laughing quietly. Jiraiya, for his part, sat with his arms folded and a puzzled look on his face while he laughed at Naruto. But I know better. You've never failed to barge in here in the past, so when I found out you walked in the building I figured you'd be up here in a matter of minutes. Come, sit down and have some tea with us. Opposite the two most powerful ninjas in his village, Naruto walked over to sit on the sofa and fought the urge to roll his eyes. He was still unaware of how the Hokage came to know each time he went into the tower. Did someone rig a seal somewhere? With a frustrated sigh, Jiraiya said, I specifically told the guard not to let anyone in below my rank. With a slightly suspicious expression on his face, he concluded, I thought that was a clever way of saying that no one was allowed. How did you convince him? Naruto wasn't in the mood to show off his new abilities just yet. He shrugged his shoulders and said, I told him to let me in, that was true in theory. To make sure the guard had no choice but to say no, he was simply omitting the part where he used to Sharon. Huh? Jiraiya asked, his tone tinged with irritation, not accepting that as a suitable response. The hell does that mean? How did you get the guard too? The Hokage interrupted, Jiraiya, please, without raising his low voice because it was already well respected throughout the village. He casually reached out and took a sip of tea, blowing on it carefully first. Let's not pry Naruto for all of his secrets at once, he said. Naruto, I'm sure you recognize that I am in the middle of a very important discussion. Say what you will and be on your way if it is of actual importance. With a firm nod, Naruto looked from the Toad Sage to the elderly Hokage. It is. I have dire news regarding the safety of our village, and it couldn't wait to be properly passed up to you and miss critical details along the way. It's about Orochimaru and a plot to destroy the leaf. I think I know how he's going to try and do it. Afterwards, Jiraiya finally said, I knew it, as he paced the room. He combed his long, white hair with a stressed hand. As soon as I found out my spy Insuna died this morning I knew that something was terribly wrong. He hadn't been reporting back to me for a few weeks now, and then he shows up dead. I should have done something about this earlier, damn it. The Hokage took another peaceful sip of his tea and gazed into space while the Sannin paced the room and muttered to himself. So Suna intends to betray us alongside Orochimaru. That was perhaps the least expected outcome in this whole debacle, wouldn't you say, Jiraiya? He hummed out loud, his actions displaying a sort of peace and calm, but his eyes held a storm and fury that Naruto had never seen in the old man before. As he paced, Jiraiya swiftly replied, It's unexpected, but this could turn out to be good for us. After a while, he turned and moved in front of Naruto, who was still sitting. If what you say is true, and the Amekage isn't supporting Orochimaru, then this may end up being the best news I've heard all day. Leaning forward to set down his cup, the Hokage let out an audible sigh. Hearing another great village breaking their oaths to be our ally is never good news, Jiraiya. But I agree, knowing that the Akatsuki won't be making their move against us certainly is relieving. Jiraiya swiftly turned his entire attention back to him and glared down at him with a fierce intensity, asking, How did you get Gaara to tell you this? This changes everything, Naruto. I need to know the details. If this report is true, then we only have a couple of days to change our entire security posture before the exams start. We'll need to start feeding the cage false intel. We'll need to break up the defense teams that we had in combination with them. But we can't move forward until we know that this is entirely accurate, or we risk driving our village to certain ruin. In defiance, Naruto shook his head. Like I said before, my methods will remain my own. Take it or leave it, that's the information I got out of Gaara. Jiraiya appeared as though he had just been struck in the face. What? That's a direct order, Naruto. Tell us how you got this information, or we'll have to waste precious time trying to confirm its reliability. Time we don't have, mind you. With intense resolve, the Hokage and the Toad Sage gazed at him. He was aware that telling them straight would be risky, but he had no choice but to come here tonight. Either the leaf would be destroyed in a surprise attack by Orochimaru and the Sand Village combined, or the Hokage would be informed now. Thousands of civilian lives depended on his choice. They would want to know how he worked it out, though, now that they knew. Eventually, he made up his mind and said, I'll tell you on one condition, you have to. One condition, my ass. Jiraiya interrupted him right away, almost exploding with annoyance. This is a direct order. You'll tell us how you found this out or you'll wake up in a prison cell tomorrow. Naruto was on the verge of losing his temper. Then so be it. I'll wake up in a prison cell tomorrow, and next week you'll wake up with the deaths of thousands of our citizens on your hands. I have one condition. Before the Sannin actually exploded, the Hokage silenced Jiraiya by raising his hand. Let's hear his one condition first, Jiraiya, and then determine our course of action. Naruto, I hope you realize that as an enlisted genin you are sworn to follow the legal direct orders of your superiors, and that violations are not treated lightly, especially when it comes to our security. My secret is a security threat to the village in and of itself, Naruto said tactfully. I don't trust anyone on the council, Lord Hokage, including either of you. It's funny how the roles have reversed. I'm the one with secrets about myself, not you. This village is rotten from the inside out and smells of evil plots and conspiracies. I recall when you, Lord Hokage, told Team 7 to go on a fictitious mission to kill Shisui for the sake of the greater good while maintaining a straight face. With a menacing expression on his face, he hesitated. If you promise that my secret won't be shared with anyone else, that it will remain confidential between the three of us, then I'll share it. Otherwise you can lock me up. Despite his angry expression, Jiraiya turned respectfully to the Hokage. The elderly village chief appeared to be thinking deeply, but Naruto interrupted him once more before he could reply. Oh, and believe me when I tell you that I'll be able to know if break that promise. From this point forward, there's nothing you can hide from me. There's nothing anyone can hide from me, so don't even think about. The Lord Hokage said, Koto Amatsukami, in a voice that was barely audible. The word hung in the air, and Jiraiya and Naruto both froze. You've acquired the Mangekyo, haven't you, Naruto? I should have known from the dark look in your eyes. That's how you convinced the guard to let you in, isn't it? And that's how you got the information from Gaara. God have mercy on us, you've actually unlocked the Mangekyo in one of its most powerful techniques. Naruto tried his hardest to contain his shock at the Hokage's deduction as soon as possible. Jiraiya's performance was not nearly as good. His expression changed quickly from surprise and disbelief to horror and finally to anger as he turned away from the Hokage in shock. With a low, menacing tone, Jiraiya finally broke the silence, asking, You've been communicating with Madara again, haven't you? I don't believe you. How did you unlock it? Who did he convince you to kill? The Toad Sage's rage was ineffective as it bounced off Naruto. No amount of rage or hatred could ever match his. Killing someone isn't the only way to unlock the Mangekyo, he finally said, maintaining eye contact while gazing down at Jiraiya. There are other ways. And yes, it was Madara who showed me what I must do to unlock this power. I decided to trust him instead of you, since Madara has been the only adult that's been open and honest with me in my entire life. Madara told me what really happened with the Uchiha clan. Madara never lied to me about the demon inside of me, or who my father really was, or how evil the village council actually is. It was Jiraiya's turn to be totally taken by surprise this time, as was the Hokage. The nefarious secret was out. Jiraiya-sama, Naruto added, continuing to focus on his sensei. You told me that I would have to grow stronger in order to be an asset to the Leaf Village instead of a liability. Well, I've acquired that strength. I just found out about a plot from our closest ally to destroy our village, and we wouldn't have known were it not for Madara's help. I've acquired a new power, and I'm going to use it to root out the evil in this village and save the Leaf once and for all. The Hokage repeated, Koto Amatsukami, and Naruto broke eye contact with Jiraiya, turning to face the elderly man. Compared to Jiraiya, he didn't appear nearly as furious. Perhaps the most dangerous Mangekyo technique ever known. And you said you acquired it without killing anyone. I don't know how you did it, but I know from past broken friendships that there are no easy ways to unlock the Mangekyo, Naruto. You must have been through a lot. His bottom lip trembled, and he cursed in his mind. He was experiencing a wave of emotions that threatened to explode. He wanted to talk to someone who could relate to his anguish and suffering. He desired sympathy. He wanted them to understand the extent of his suffering. However, he was no longer a child. The Hokage went on, that technique is one of the reasons that led the council to so easily push to exterminate the Uchiha, which caused Jiraiya to gasp. At last, they had acknowledged it. They feared the ocular powers of the Uchiha, and for good reason. They knew of the power of Koto Amatsukami, the ability to hypnotize others, read their minds, and all without them even knowing it was happening. No one was comfortable knowing the Uchiha could have such a technique, and it was no secret to anyone that Shisui was likely to awaken that power himself. Even without the Mangekyu, Shisui had been able to use hypnotic genjutsu more effectively than this village has seen in my lifetime. And now you have his power. Ironic. The council agreed that killing the peace-loving Shisui would be necessary in order to protect the village and themselves, and now his power lies with you, who wishes to use it against them when Shisui never did. The elderly man sighed deeply. You're right, Naruto. No one can know about this new power of yours. Villages across the ninja world will either attempt to kill you or capture you, and though it pains me to admit it, there are those within our own village who would attempt to do the same. Koto Amatsukami will remain yet another of our village's many dark secrets. I command it to be so. Jiraiya, your lips will be sealed regarding this, understood? Jiraiya didn't hesitate to answer, even though it seemed like their minds were racing with a million ideas every second. Yes, sir. If I might, Lord Hokage, I would recommend the immediate promotion of Naruto to that of Special Jonin. He should be pulled from the Chunin exams, and train under myself and trusted genjutsu specialists in order to learn how to. No, Naruto snarled, fearlessly severing his senior-ranking ninja. I need to compete in the finals. Promote me to whatever you want after, but I need to face off against Neji Hyuga. No matter what. Before the Sannin could say anything, the Hokage interrupted Jiraiya, who appeared to have had enough disrespect for one day. The Hokage turned back to Naruto and said, Good, in a calm, still voice. If you really want to, you can remain in the exams, though I think Jiraiya's recommendation to promote you to Special Jonin makes sense afterwards. Perhaps if you perform well enough, no one would even question your quick promotion anyway. Yes, that sounds good. Also, I hope you realize that I could have kept my realization to myself, and sent you away without you knowing that I discovered your secret. The truth was out. Naruto wouldn't have realized he had figured it out at all if the old man had simply told him to go. He went on, staring into Naruto's eyes despite his newfound awareness of their danger. I want you to trust me, Naruto, he said. No, I need you to trust me. That's why I'll let you compete if you want. Read through my mind now if you must, but I need you to believe that what I want most is to protect this village. I will use every tool in my arsenal if I must, and you just become one of my most powerful. Let's work together, and... CSHHHHH. A voice called out, Lord Hokage. From what looked like a radio on the Hokage's desk. This is an emergency. We've just been informed that Orochimaru has been sighted in the Uchiha compound about 20 minutes ago. Jiraiya moaned, holy hell, as he ran a tense hand through his hair once more. Now this, and the report is 20 minutes old. There's no way he'll still be there, but I have to go and secure the area. With a nod from the Hokage, Jiraiya vanished from the room in a puff of smoke. Following a brief period of quiet, the elderly elder offered to pour Naruto more tea after taking a sip of his own. He said, more tea, Naruto. In a cheerful voice for someone who had just discovered that a snake was slithering around his village, poised to attack. I fear it's going to be a long night. Late in the evening, Naruto was relieved of a heavy burden after leaving the Hokage's tower. Despite his reluctance to divulge his newfound authority, he was relieved that the village authorities were aware of the San's impending treachery. For him it had been a long day. He had discovered that he had used his body to kill the Uchiha Madara. He had discovered that Orochimaru and their ally would betray them. At this point, all he wanted to do was sleep and hope that tomorrow wouldn't be nearly as upsetting as today. He didn't have much time because the sun would probably peek over the horizon in a few hours. Upon arriving at his door, he had to suppress his groaning when he noticed Hinata standing outside his apartment. Really, of all times, now, had she stood outside his door all day? She called out to him softly, Naruto-kun, her voice a little hoarse from probably not talking for a while. She cleared her throat. Please, tell me what's going on. I don't understand what's happening with you anymore. I'm scared. He had a strong desire to tell her to stop bothering him and to speak to her later. Given how exhausted he was, that would undoubtedly be the simple course of action at this point. But ever since he went into the forest to face the Mangeku's trial, he couldn't help but feel that he and his best friend were rapidly drifting apart. Given how well they had been getting along lately, he didn't want to destroy their friendship. She also didn't seem to be amenable to the, we'll talk later, tactic. He sighed as he trailed off. Hinata-chan, unable to maintain her intense stare for more than a second. Her bottom lip was trembling. Oh no. He passed her and unlocked his door with his key. He turned to her and said, "Come on in," interrupting her before she could protest with a cry. "You can stay over tonight. I'm literally about to pass out in the next few minutes, but I promise you that we'll talk in the morning." His emotions and thought processes were obviously suffering as a result of gaining the Mangekyo, but it was somewhat comforting to know that Hinata pouting could still make him feel something. The day before the end. The day before the Chunin exam finals, Naruto woke up feeling anxious. A month ago, the finals seemed like a distant dream, but now they were only a day away. He would be fighting to the death in front of thousands of people tomorrow, regardless of how much time he had spent acquiring the Mangekyo and worrying about Orochimaru, and now the Sand Village, attacking the Leaf. Tens of thousands. Oh, and he was going to take Hinata-chan out on his first actual date. Somehow, early this morning, she had persuaded him that what he needed most was to go on a date. It was a slim chance, but he couldn't bring himself to refuse her. Yesterday, the Hokage had informed him that he would probably get in touch with him once more for a significant update. The Hokage and Jiraiya were preparing for the impending attack, but Naruto wasn't keeping track of every move they made. They had no idea whether it would occur before or after the tests. As far as they were aware, Orochimaru might be preparing to do something during the tests, but they weren't positive. It was now time for him to share with Hinata the details of his horrific experience obtaining the Mangekyo Sharingan. Even though he didn't believe that a date was the ideal occasion to share such an experience, he was beginning to believe that if he waited to tell her now, it would be more difficult to do so later. In the past, she had accepted him for who he was. He recalled how she had assured him during the second exam phase that she was aware of Madara and the 9 tails within him and that she still cared for him. He had faith in Hinata-chan. He was certain that he could rely on Hinata-chan, even though he was unaware of the Hokage or Jiraiya. He and Hinata had decided to have lunch together and then explore the village's festivals for the remainder of the day, culminating in a spectacular fireworks display to cap off the evening. He sincerely hoped that the day ahead of him would be able to distract him from the stress and hate that had been coursing through his head lately. Afterward, he felt a bitter sense of emptiness, even though the hatred within him gave him an intoxicating power that also numbed all of his emotional pain. It reminded him of the time he and his group went to a local bar to celebrate their enlistment as genin with Shisui and had a bunch of sake. He had been feeling fantastic during the night, but the following morning he felt terrible because he had consumed a little too much alcohol. Even though Naruto had been reluctant to touch sake for a while and could see why the village had prohibited it for children until they enlisted, he was increasingly tempted to give in to his hatred. He pondered whether this was the way that the ancient tablet had hinted at some Uchiha becoming blind with hatred. But if his Mangekyo had filled his pain and emptiness with comforting hatred, yesterday night's encounter with Hinata-chan had had the exact opposite effect. His hatred had been growing all day, and using his Mangekyo had given his mind a sinister energy. However, it vanished last night after he spent some time conversing with Hinata-chan. Instead, he had felt a comforting calm that everything would work out. No matter what, his friends will always be there for him. He would still be important to Hinata-chan. He and Hinata had decided to have lunch at a local barbecue restaurant at noon, even though he was itching for some ramen. They would have plenty of time to discuss their problems while they waited for some fresh meat to arrive and cooked in front of them while a loud background played. Wearing a pair of pants and his favorite black Uchiha shirt, Naruto leapt over the railing of his balcony and into the alley below, strolling idly into the already congested streets as the afternoon sun shone on his face. The majority of people were already wearing traditional summer yukatas, despite the fact that the fireworks, parades, and other festival attractions wouldn't begin until later that evening. He had seen men and women in every color of the rainbow, wearing clothes styled from every ninja village in the 15 minutes it took him to walk into the nearby food district. He had always found it cool that every village had a slightly different yukata style. He was beginning to pick up on patterns, and before long, he could infer, from a person's subtle designs, which village they were from. Occasionally, he would glance up at the ninja headband and discover that someone was from a small village as well. The patterns were bright and sharp from the cloud, wavy deep blues from the mist, and light flowing from the sand. One of the girls wearing a gorgeous dark green yukata with deep swirling red embroidery was standing in front of the barbecue restaurant. If he had to guess, it was most likely a Konoha native. When he looked up to make sure the ninja headband was on him, he was shocked to see the distinctive pearly eyes of Naruto-kun. exclaimed Hinata-chan, greeting him with a smile as he ran towards him. He was taken aback. She looked stunning. I just got here. Are you ready to eat? She even had a unique style for her dark brown hair. Her braided ponytail was being held back with her ninja headband, which she was wearing as a hairband. It took him a few seconds to process it all, and he had to shake his head in order to bring himself back to the present and answer before he looked foolish. That's probably too late. Wow, Hinata-chan, you look great, he said, approaching her closely. He wanted to lean in closer to get a better smell, but whatever flowery perfume she was wearing was so subtle that he hardly noticed it. He fought that impulse hard. I didn't think you'd end up wearing a yukata. His compliments caused her face to flush quickly, but his was likely flushing as well. She looked fantastic. He had been holding back. Before she could reply, he grabbed her hand and led her inside. Let's go on in, he said. I know we have a lot to talk about. They were fortunate to find a two-person table near the back of the restaurant, which was understandably packed today. They didn't have to worry about others overhearing their conversation, and the large gatherings of people laughing and eating created a very amiable and playful atmosphere. They looked at each other anxiously for a while before he made the decision to apologize for last night. They ordered some water and some of the menu's standard meats. He began, I'm sorry for making you wait outside my apartment for so long, feeling a tiny twinge of guilt as his chest, now free of all his hatred, began to fill. I didn't think everything would take so long, and a lot happened that I didn't expect. I'm sorry. She gave him a headshake in return. Don't worry about it, she said, grinning. I'm really glad you let me stay over last night. And thanks for sleeping on your couch, although I really would have been fine if. She abruptly stopped speaking to take a quick sip of water, causing her face to flush. Okay, if what, it's probably best to avoid pushing her. I ended up spending most of the time on your roof. She interrupted once more, ending the conversation there. Did you know that there's a garden up there? He gave a nod. Naturally, he was aware of his rooftop. In order to be able to use the substitution technique in an emergency, he marked almost every rooftop in his apartment with seals that held a large amount of his chakra. Being ready always paid off. Running around the village as a young thief had left him with some habits. Anyways, she said, something really strange happened to me while I was up there. Do you remember how in the middle of my prelim fight against Neji, I suddenly got a lot stronger and was able to use wood-style jutsu? He gave a nod. Yeah, how could I forget? You started kicking his butt. He grinned as usual, but the thought of Neji slapping down on his best friend made him feel a little resentful. Yes, he would retaliate against him for that. It's possible that Neji is unconsciously relishing his final night on Earth. She stammered. I don't know how to explain this, her eyes lowered as she struggled to find the right words. That wasn't my energy. I can't use wood-style techniques right now if I tried. Somehow, I was able to gather in a bunch of energy from the forest outside during that fight. I've always felt different when I'm around nature, so I decided to purposely test it out when I was waiting for you on the rooftop. I sat down and waited to see if I felt any energy at all, and I actually did. Naruto kept thinking about what Madara had told him the previous evening. He had claimed that certain senju were able to absorb chakra from their surroundings and use it to eventually enter sage mode. That was what the Mangekyo Sharingan was to them. He waited for her to finish explaining instead of interrupting her. She continued slowly, all of this energy started flowing in me, but he could tell by the look on her face and the tone of her voice that this was not going in a positive direction. Really, I was close to crying when I first sat up there. But as more energy came in, I felt more and more detached from my emotions. I felt still. I felt disconnected from my worries, as if none of my problems really seemed that important anymore. She stopped for a second and inhaled deeply. She was starting to stutter. But it went beyond that. Eventually, it got to the point where I didn't even care if you broke your promise and abandoned me in the village. Nothing seemed to matter. As soon as I realized I was thinking such terrible thoughts, I shook my head and started to move away. I could tell that I was filled with even more energy than I had been ever before, and I could tell that I could probably do some sort of wood-style jutsu if I wanted, but as I moved away and tried to gather my feelings about you, the power slipped away. He could see now that she was beginning to feel the verge of tears. I don't know what happened to me, Naruto-kun. I want to learn more about this new power, and about my bloodline, but not if it makes me not care about you anymore. I'm scared, Naruto-kun. What if the next time I try that, my own thoughts never return? What if I'm permanently stuck like that, uncaring about anything, even you? What if I lose myself to this power? Naruto was so amazed that he had to shake his head and sigh. As it happens, Hinata was feeling many of the same anxieties that he was. For her, however, it was the exact opposite. He feared that his evil hatred would eventually triumph, and she feared that her heartless tranquility would eventually triumph. Naruto finally said, "Don't worry about that right now," as he extended his hand to touch hers. In an attempt to cheer her up, he smiled his warmest smile at her. "I actually learned a lot about your bloodline as well this past week. I think I can explain what happened to you. Please hold on to your questions, this is going to take a while." After a few hours, Naruto had told Hinata his story, but it required a lot of deep breathing and a ton of mouthwatering barbecue. Almost everything, from Madara telling him about the Mangekyo Sharingan, to his first trial sitting in the forest, to his eventual need to use his hatred to murder everyone in his visions, and finally to his realization of what was going on inside Gaara's head. The portion of his visions in which he killed the Uchiha clan was the only one he chose to omit. He simply wasn't prepared to tell her that. He didn't want her to know about the village's evils just yet, and he didn't want her to know that his own hands were responsible for the act. Before she could answer the majority of it, Naruto chose to softly add, "I think we're two sides of the same coin," at the end. After spending so much time with them, the waiter had come to leave a check on their table, likely indicating that he was ready for them to pay and depart. The Uchiha and the Senju. The two original bloodline limits of the sage, separated for countless years. My bloodline limit uses anger and wrath to overcome emotional distress and grant me the ultimate genjutsu techniques. I'm pretty confident now that your bloodline limit uses peace and stillness to overcome your physical distress and grant you the ultimate ninjutsu and taijutsu. But I don't think we'll be overcome by it either. Especially if we have each other." He was taken aback when Hinata hurried to his side of the table and gave him a tight hug. Even though the restaurant was crowded and noisy, Naruto still experienced a wave of embarrassment. She whispered, softly but fiercely, "Naruto-kun," into his shoulder, pressing her face against it. "I'm so sorry that you had to go through that. I'm so sorry that I wasn't there for you. I'm so..." He got up quickly so he wouldn't topple over in his chair and make a bigger mess. Hinata was practically carried up with him. He said, Thanks, Hinata-chan," as he yanked her away from him. "Here, let me pay for the meal and we can talk about it while we walk." Hinata had forgiven him, just as he had anticipated. More than that, she had begun to cry for him as he described the agony he endured in his horrible life. It was surprising how many tears had been streaming down his face all the time, almost stopping him from speaking clearly as he told her his stories. After the preliminary round concluded last month, everything had changed. Everything was different. He felt like a completely different person. It seemed like a year had passed since the preliminary exams. He could tell that Hinata's feelings for him had not changed, despite her change. Perhaps they had, but only in a constructive way. As he had hoped, she still cared about him. When she hugged him, the knot in his stomach that had been readying itself repeatedly finally relaxed. He assumed that, after all, he had not realized how afraid he had been of losing her friendship. It was now evening as they strolled hand in hand through the festivals. Although he was aware that they still needed to talk, he felt relieved that the fundamental truth was now known. They strolled through the Leaf Village festivals for a few more hours, stopping at different street-side stalls to buy snacks or play games. Some of the stalls were even designed for ninjas. The last one they had been to featured a number of circular wooden targets that moved quickly. The object of the game was to hit them all with a wooden kunai in a set amount of time. Although academy students were likely the intended audience for this particular stall, Naruto showed no remorse by quickly knocking down every target and allowing Hinata to choose the winner. The casual way they held hands while strolling through the streets together had not yet been mentioned by either of them. When she had finished putting on her new hairpin, she extended her hand eagerly and grinned with delight as their fingers touched. Until they happened to walk past Team 10, who were all having a good time at the festival, he hadn't even felt particularly self-conscious about it. Choji and Shikamaru had only exchanged the standard, "Good luck tomorrow," and, "Hey, what's up guys," statements. However, Ino's adorable partner blushed as usual when he happily giggled and gave Hinata a less than subtle wink, thumbs up, and, "Way to go." As she passed, she simply tightened her grip on his hand. He felt better than he had in a long time after that. Even though he hoped that this lovely day would last forever, the sun finally set, and the air was filled with excitement as the festival's conclusion approached. Naruto turned to face his friend, who was humming with joy and contentment as they finished their cotton candy together on a random bench off to the side. He inquired as to whether she had a particular location in mind when he asked, "Where do you want to watch the fireworks from?" She seemed to be having a great time so far, and he wanted to make sure the evening ended well. "I say we either go to center town so that we can get a good view of the parade going through right after, or we go find someplace up high. What do you think?" She answered almost immediately. She blurted out, "I want to go someplace alone." As she turned to face him with an odd intensity in her eyes and her cheeks flushed. What did she intend to do? So, obviously, nowhere close to the Hokage's tower. You know, they usually set off the fireworks from the top of the monument, he thought out loud as he tilted his head toward the inflexible Hokage. But I heard from some of the stall owners that they changed the location at some point to be around most of the south wall. So that means that we can probably get a good view of everything from the top of the monument, if you want it. Yes, she replied exuberantly. That sounds perfect. Sasuke elsewhere. Sasuke and Gurren couldn't get rid of the ominous mood of Orochimaru's visit, even with the joyous celebrations all around them. Since this was her first visit to the Leaf Village and anyone visiting should take the time to enjoy their renowned festival, he had invited her to join him in enjoying the event. Despite her joyful agreement, their thoughts would always turn back to Orochimaru's sinister promise whenever they were alone. Gurren said, "I can't believe how fast this month has gone," in a slightly dejected tone. Right now, they were enjoying a peaceful break from the busy streets they had just left by sitting on a park bench. He kept worrying that he would bump into Sakura and cause her to cry once more, but fortunately, he was able to avoid any unpleasant encounters. He smiled as usual and said, "I can't believe how quickly you went from wanting to kill me to going on dates," when she scoffed and cocked her head to the side. "Really though, you're a nice girl. I'm glad I made friends with you." He also meant it. At last, she nodded in agreement and turned back to face him with a smile that was unusually shy for her. Still, he didn't want to ignore what had happened the other day and ruin the rest of the evening. Uncertain of how to begin this appropriately, he couldn't help but sigh. He made the quiet decision to say, "Orochimaru was wrong, you know," while crossing his legs on the bench and gazing forward. He wanted to put his arm around her shoulders but decided it would be better to put it around her back instead. "He's not your only choice. You can go back to Akatsuki and train like usual. Maybe you can even go to the Amekage himself and explain your situation. If he's anything of a good leader, he might feel sympathetic to you and let you leave the organization. I'm sure he's dealt with something like this before, seeing how he was granting amnesty to any other villages, criminals." His sigh was caught by her. She began, looking down at her hands with a dejected expression. "Even if I do manage to leave Akatsuki," she said. "What then? How could I possibly ever reach Itachi's level? I can't train myself that well." "You could come to the Leaf Village," he said right away, his voice assured. "I know that we have programs to allow higher-level ninjas to test into our ranks. If the Amekage gives you his blessing, then our Hokage would be happy to take more skilled ninja, especially with your bloodline." Then she turned to face him and said, "And then I'd be in your shoes, with comparable speed. Who in this village could train either of us to be as strong as Itachi?" "Oh no, there is no simple solution to that. I don't know, but Itachi managed to get as strong as he is while staying in the village, so I know it's possible, right?" Frustrated, she shook her head. "I'm not worried about how strong Itachi was when he left the village. I'm worried about how strong he'll be years after training with the Amekage's resources, the other commanders, and even the Amekage himself." The idea was unsettling. As Itachi had been on the night of the massacre, he frequently found himself freezing his older brother in time. In order to be strong enough to have stopped Itachi that night rather than being completely worthless and without hope, he longed to achieve that strength. Itachi, however, would not be the same person he had been that evening. Gurren was correct, he would be much more powerful. Itachi would put in just as much training. Sasuke ultimately responded, "Orochimaru is a snake," but this utterly disregarded the legitimate argument she had just raised. "I don't know the right answer off the top of my head, but I know that trusting yourself with a snake will end up with us getting bitten. He even told us that much." She yelled back, emotionally, "I don't care about getting bitten," and raised her voice slightly in desperation. "Not if we manage to kill Itachi before that. That's the whole point of everything. Of my life." Without encircling the bench, he extended his arm and grasped her nearest hand. "I've already told you," he said with a smile, "there's more to life than just revenge. There's friends. There's family. Itachi didn't strip everything from me. I still have Naruto as my brother and my best friend. And Itachi didn't strip everything from you either." Despite turning her head away from him, she tightened her grip on his hand. That's not true. He killed my entire family. I was left with nothing. I'm not as lucky as you were. I'm still left with nothing. Squeezing her hand back, he interrupted, "You have me now," and she turned to face him. "I'm here with you now, aren't I? Itachi didn't kill me, and now I'm your friend. You're not alone anymore, Gurren. Remember that. You're not alone in your mission to kill Itachi, and you're not alone in life. I'm here with you, and I'm not going anywhere." Even though saying it out loud sounded corny, he was speaking from the heart. He cared about what happened to her and was there for her. Friends act in this way. Fortunately, it appeared that she believed him because she began to slowly smile back at him. She scooted closer to him on the bench, sniffing back whatever had been building inside her. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and he had to force himself not to flinch in surprise. She whispered softly, "You can put your arm around me, dummy," but her voice was devoid of venom. "Just for tonight, please." Naruto. About 30 minutes later, he was sitting directly beside Hinata-chan on top of the monument's fort's face, which was obviously his favorite, and gazing down at the vivid lights that dotted the village. The only sound they heard was the soft wind, despite their knowledge of how loud the packed village must be. He suspected there was more to it than that, but that wind made it just cold enough for Hinata-chan to seemingly justify scooting up beside him and resting her head against his shoulder. The memories of their brief time together while she was in the hospital lingered in his mind. At one point, when she couldn't see him, he nearly bent forward to kiss her. On another occasion, she had pushed him out of the window after giving him a quick peck on the cheek. Lastly, he made one attempt to kiss her head but unintentionally ended up kissing her nose instead. She had never once voiced any complaints, and judging from their most recent near accident, Hinata-chan appeared to be quite content with their newfound intimacy. What if, however, he simply leaned in and gave her a kiss now? Would that be acceptable to her? He had a twisted thought all of a sudden. He could simply enter her mind and find out with his new power, wouldn't he? He could delve into her past and discover her true feelings for him. Additionally, he discovered that he could use Kotoa Matsukami to coerce her into telling him how she felt, as he had done with the Chunin who stood watch outside the Hokage's office. He shook his head hastily. Indeed, it was feasible, but he would never use his own abilities on her. "I wonder when the show will start. It's getting pretty late, don't you?" He started to say something, but Hinata abruptly interrupted. She abruptly and solemnly started, "In my visions, you're always standing on top of the Hokage monument," which made him wonder why she was even considering such a thing. One of the last pieces just fell into place. "You always told me to close my eyes, to go to sleep. No matter how hard I fight against it, no matter how hard I try and keep my eyes open, I always end up doing exactly what you say," she said. It all seemed so surreal, following a brief silence. She was still resting on his shoulder, physically near him but emotionally far away. "At first I thought it was impossible because you would never have a Sharingan. But that hope was shattered when I saw your crimson eyes for the first time. After that, I had always hoped that no matter what, if you told me to close my eyes and go to sleep, how could I possibly sleep in a situation like that?" She raised her head to gaze at him, but he averted his gaze. He could see where this was going. "But I just realized, now you have the power to hypnotize me as well, don't you? If you wanted to, you could tell me to fall asleep right now and I would have no choice. You could use the Mangekyo to force me." His voice was strained and quiet as he said, "Yes." He sensed her look turn away from him and back toward the village as she let out a sigh. "You told me today that using the Mangekyo requires being fueled by your hatred, and that it changes the way you think. Naruto, I'm scared. I'm terrified that you're turning into that person who told me he would burn the village in the blackest of flames, and there's nothing I can do about it." He felt her beginning to tremble against him and swallowed. The darkest of fires. Now he realized that could only mean Amaterasu. Fortunately, he kept his use of that ability in his visions from her. She would be even more upset than she is right now. He raised his arm, wrapped it around her, and drew her toward him. This was not how this night had to end. Not after spending so much time together. Not when their life together had been so amazing. He was unable to abandon her. He would never abandon her. He needed her now more than ever. Although he had previously believed that he had felt strongly about her, he now realized that she might be the only thing preventing his heart from exploding with hatred. He was aware of this since she was the only thing that could truly fill his heart, even at this moment when he was so close to her. Additionally, he was in excruciating pain as he watched her go through this. He gently grasped her chin with the free hand and turned her head, forcing her tear-filled, translucent eyes to meet his. He inhaled deeply. Hurry up, fool. Simply say it. Say it to her, and say it to yourself. You like her, much more than a companion. She has always appealed to you. She will understand that you will always be there for her if you tell her that now. Looking at her lovely face this close to his made it more obvious than ever before, if he hadn't been certain already. He wanted to give his life to protect this person. He had no intention of hurting this person. He loved this person. He cupped her cheek and gently wiped away a tear that had fallen with his thumb. The night sky was full of light, and her face was glowing with vivid colors. Hinata-chan, il. Boom, boom, boom. As distant fireworks burst and cheers echoed from the village below, they both winced and turned. Naruto cursed his luck and bit his tongue. Really, of all times, now, could all of this have happened a minute earlier? Along the majority of the southern wall, missiles of light blasted into the air, illuminating the sky with a sequence of enormous explosions that didn't resemble any show they had ever seen. He heard Hinata-chan murmur, "It's beautiful," and returned his focus to her. Even as his hand continued to lightly cup her face, he could feel her heart pounding more quickly. He had lost the opportunity that had been his. Was he truly certain that this was what he wanted to do? Had he been spared instead by the fireworks? No, you know what, don't bother. In any case, he had always been more effective with deeds than words. He needed her to understand his feelings. It's time to take that chance. She looked at him bewilderedly as he gently turned her face back to him with his hand. He swiftly leaned in and kissed her, not waiting for any other justification or diversion. A rainbow of reflected colors dancing in her prismatic irises, her pearly orbs widening in surprise, was the last thing he saw before closing his eyes. Boom! Her astonished gasp was barely muffled by the explosion of more fireworks. He thought about how he might have just made the biggest mistake of his life for the longest moment he had ever known. Realizing that he probably ought to have prepared his list of excuses in advance in case things didn't work out, he began to back off. Because at the moment, his thoughts were as empty as. Before Hinata threw her arms around him and pushed back into him so forcefully that they almost fell over, their lips had just barely parted. She was returning his kiss. It was difficult for him to think clearly, but if he did, it was the startling realization of how soft her lips were, followed by the knowledge that he would eventually have to breathe. Breathing could wait, but the first one was more crucial. Everything that was good had to end. Eventually, their lips parted. After a while, the fireworks ceased. Eventually, the parade's flashing lights below vanished in little clusters, leaving the village dark once more. However, Naruto could honestly say that the future appeared bright for the first time in what seemed like an eternity, and he was looking forward to all of the positive things that tomorrow would bring. Early morning, Naruto woke up that morning with a grin that was noticeably bigger than usual. He raked his hands through his hair and let out a long breath before he even got out of bed, thinking back on what had happened the night before. That day had been almost ideal. Oh man. Hinata-chan had been kissed by him. And she had returned his kiss. He had escorted her back to her residence in the former Senju compound following the conclusion of the parades and fireworks. They had been holding hands carelessly and glowing the whole way. He didn't care if the two of them participated in the parade. Yes, he was aware that he had a big final exam later that day, but it didn't seem all that important anymore. Hold on, he needed to tell Sasuke. Imagine Sasuke's expression when he discovers that he kissed Hinata-chan. Hee hee. Tink tink. Something seemed to be tapping on his window. Confusion gripped Naruto as he rolled over to the far side of the bed and drew back the curtains, allowing a strong beam of morning light to flood the room. He could see the outline of a familiar man with spiky hair through squinted eyes. His Jonin sensei, Kakashi Hatake, said, "Yo," as he drew the window aside. "Long time no see, Naruto." Naruto felt compelled to roll his eyes and frown. Even now, though, he was unable to find the anger in himself. "You know I have a front door, right, Kakashi-sensei?" He would reserve his animosity for his first battle. The masked, Silver-haired Jonin tilted his head sideways, seemingly unaware that Naruto had a front door. I suppose you do. Anyway, I'm here with an important message from Lord Hokage. You've been summoned to his office immediately. After giving his eyes one last rub, Naruto collapsed back into his cozy bed. With a groan, he made every effort to relive the celebration with Hinata from the previous evening. Wasn't it going to be a long day? Okay, I'll get ready. The Tower of Hokage. After about 30 minutes, Naruto and Kakashi-sensei stood erect at attention in front of the Hokage's desk. On his desk, the elderly man appeared to be flipping through some pages. Lord Jiraiya and 3 other elderly people, whom Naruto knew were council members and advisors to the Hokage, were standing behind him. He was positive that Lord Danzo was one of the 3 elderly advisors. With the exception of Lord Danzo, who for some reason was looking down at the Hokage with great interest, they all appeared to be concentrating on him. Eventually, the Hokage gathered the last pile of papers and pushed it aside, saying, "All right." His hawkish but amiable eyes landed on him, then on Kakashi. "Please, stand at ease. Naruto, you're probably wondering why I called you here the morning of your big exam." Naruto just nodded. He was obviously curious, but he didn't want to waste time putting it into words. Furthermore, he needed to wait and find out why he was being bothered at this early hour, or else he might come across as snarky. The Hokage went on, "I'll keep this simple and brief. Akatsuki's official messenger Hawk arrived a few minutes ago with an urgent message. The Amekage and his entourage will arrive at the village gates within the hour. This will be the first time the Amekage has ever stepped foot in our village, and I would like to welcome him with open arms in hopes to strengthen our relationship. As far as I know, this is the first official trip the Amekage has ever made outside of the Land of Rain since they became a great village." With a sigh, the elderly man took a moment to take out his pipe and snap his fingers to light it. No one dared to even flinch, since he was the man who handled everyone's paycheck. Naruto had to fight the urge to inform the elderly geezer that smoking was improper indoors and that it was bad for his health. The Hokage puffed out a long stream of smoke, filling the room with the disagreeable odor of tobacco. "Unfortunately, as you're well aware, more is going on in this village than just preparations for our annual Chunin exams. We are under threat of Orochimaru, who we've now confirmed has been a part of Akatsuki for the few years he has been away from us. Not only that, but I have informed everyone here that you are aware of the Sand's intent to betray us. I won't waste time with useless banter when the Amekage arrives. I will tell him of our situation, and find out whether or not he is willing to help us." Yes, so far that made sense. However, what role did he play in any of this? After guessing his thoughts, the Hokage said, "That's where you come in, Naruto," with a slight smile. "I would like for you to come with me and my entourage when we welcome the Amekage. You could be of important use to us." "Lord Third," yelled Danzo, who seemed to be among the few brave enough to interrupt the Hokage. "As I've stated before, it simply doesn't make any sense to bring the Leaf's Jinchuriki in such close proximity to the Amekage. The Amekage has no true alliance with any other village, and now we've confirmed that he's been harboring our greatest criminals, even as far as taking in the Jinchuriki of the Hidden Mist village. Who's to say the Amekage won't try and kidnap our Jinchuriki and leave our village in a weakened state?" After that, Naruto felt compelled to interrupt. "I have a name, Lord Danzo," he chose to interrupt, his voice tinged with venom. "I'm not just the village Jinchuriki. I'm a Genin, soon to be a Chunin if the day goes well." "You're a Jinchuriki," Danzo shot back, his voice devoid of any trace of regret. "Regardless of your rank, the demon inside of you will be the most important thing you'll ever be to this village. You're a tool to be used in times of war to balance our power with the other hidden villages. A tool we cannot afford to lose to the Amekage." Lord Danzo's attention returned to the Hokage. "Lord Third, you have simply not given a satisfactory reason as to why our Jinchuriki has any need to be a part of the entourage which welcomes the Amekage." The Hokage finally answered. "Naruto here was the one who discovered that the Sand was going to betray us," after pausing for a long moment to take a puff from his pipe. Danzo's eyes grew wide. Obviously he was unaware of that. "I will not disclose how or why, but Naruto is the first-hand source. It may be well for him to be there to help, convince the Amekage that we need him to help us." The Hokage gave Naruto a sharp look and hesitated when he used the word, "convince," with care. Behind him, Jiraiya gave a subtle nod. The truth struck him like a falling brick after he waited an additional second. "Holy, The Hokage wanted him there to force the Amekkage to assist the Leaf by using Kotoamatsukami on him. The elders and even Kakashi next to him appeared to be unsure of what the Hokage meant by convince, based on their irate and perplexed expressions. That's great to hear that the elderly man kept Naruto's new power a secret from even his closest advisors. When he expressed his desire for Naruto to trust him, he must have been sincere. "Count me in," Naruto declared, interrupting whatever rebuttal Lord Danzo was attempting to offer. The entire room turned to look at him. He smiled wolfishly at them all. "I'll help convince the Amekkage to aid us to the best of my ability." Half an hour later, in the midst of the peculiar group that would greet the soon-to-be Amekkage in the Leaf Village was Naruto. He was wearing his official Kage outfit, standing right at the third Hokage's right hand, and he was just minutes away from meeting the head of the enigmatic Akatsuki. He couldn't help but feel anxious. Despite the gravity of the situation, Lord Danzo and Lord Jiraiya, who were with his group, appeared more at ease than he was. The group of Akatsuki ninja who had come more than a month ago to take the tests were behind the Leaf Ninja welcome party. He recognized Utakata, the bubble ninja who was apparently also a Jinchuriki, Sasuke's new friend Gurren, and the white-haired Kimimaro, who was grinning brightly back at him. Their sensei equivalent stood in front of them. He was a frightening-looking man who, in contrast to the others, wore a high collar and a large straw hat. Naruto couldn't quite explain why the man appeared to be the embodiment of death, but it was undoubtedly related to the enormous three-bladed scythe he was carrying. Surprisingly, Masahiro was stranded in the front of the other Akatsuki group, with his two teammates following him. The other red-haired girl, Karen, gave him a strange look of admiration that left him a little perplexed, and Suigetsu, the water jello guy Naruto defeated in the preliminary round, gave him a nasty scowl when their eyes met. Their sensei equivalent, who most certainly ought to be present to greet their village's Kage, was conspicuously absent. Strange. Just in case, it would be better to activate his Sharingan now. He activated his ocular bloodline by raising a portion of his spiritual chakra to his eyes, and... "You fool!" He flinched in irritation as Madara's voice echoed in his mind like a shout. During yesterday's festival and the hectic morning activities, he had been able to block out the memory of the ancient Uchiha patriarch. It was hardly a guess as to what his subconscious visitor would say. "What did I tell you about using Kotoamatsukami without my permission? You nearly died in the Shukaku's realm. Did you even realize that? That you can easily die in another person's mind if you're not careful?" Naruto shook his head and let out a sigh. "Well, I'm glad I took that risk. Don't you realize how important it is that I found out about the Sand Village? I was able to warn the Hokage in time, and now he's having me use the Mangekyo to convince the Amekkage to help us." He cut off their communication for approximately 30 seconds because he somehow sensed that Madara was going to roar in rage. Before his prisoner could verbally abuse him, he reconnected and swiftly cut in when he sensed Madara's chakra had subsided to a manageable stream to his mind. Naruto mentally said, "Listen, being careful not to say the words out loud. The Hokage wouldn't believe me unless I told him about my power. I made sure that only he and Jiraiya know. And now they've asked me to help them out by convincing the Amekkage to come to our aid. You've royally messed up, boy. The fact that the Hiruzen and Jiraiya know about our power is a tremendous mistake. Had you consulted me first, I would have advised you to use Kotoamatsukami's hypnotism to convince them to trust you. Obviously then you would protect your stupid Leaf Village, and they wouldn't know about the Mangekyo. Now you'll have to be wary of them. Believe me when I say that no one is comfortable with the knowledge that they can be hypnotized against their will, without them even noticing it. The Hokage and the Sannin are not perfect. They may grow to fear your power, as they rightly should. And as they grow to fear your power, greater becomes the temptation for them to rationalize killing you. They may come to think that the risk of another village discovering you is too great. It doesn't matter. The council and the Hokage decided that the Uchiha clan was worth killing in its entirety, largely in part because of Kotoamatsukami. Have you forgotten that the Hokage allowed Shisui's murder? Naruto said nothing, resentfully. He hadn't forgotten, of course. Of course not. I also haven't forgotten that it was you who took over my body to kill my entire family. So forgive me if I don't completely trust you at the moment. Even though he knew that this was not the moment to lose his sense of direction, he couldn't help but feel his anger starting to flare up again. He sensed that Madara's own anger had somewhat cooled, for better or worse. You were too young and naive to understand, Naruto. I thought I already explained that to you. Would you rather I rejected Itachi's offer to help him kill the Uchiha? Itachi would have likely killed half of the clan before dying himself. What then would the Uchiha do? They would have easily figured out that Itachi had been sent by the village leaders. Would they sit idly by knowing that the Hokage had tried to kill them? No, they wouldn't waste a single day before launching their counterattack. They would be destroyed of course, but not before killing thousands of ninjas and civilians alike. And our enemies would take that opportunity to attack the Leaf Village, likely crushing us. I'll be honest, boy, I don't care for the Leaf. I only accepted Itachi's offer because the outcome would get you a Sharingan, which benefits the both of us. But had I not, you must realize that the Leaf would likely cease to exist. He said nothing as Madara's icy reasoning took hold of his thoughts. Even though it was cold and bitter, it didn't really put out the flames of hatred that were beginning to burn inside of him. That didn't bother Naruto because he would need that rage later to use his Mangekyo. At least heed my warning now, while there's still time. Remember that as long as I remain inside of you, my primary interest is to ensure that you don't die. Koto Amatsukami is not without its own risks, like every Mangekyo technique. I would have you listen to my instructions if you are willing to drop your pride and accept them. To keep from lashing out, Naruto inhaled deeply. Madara was correct. Even though it was in his nature to despise Madara, he needed to understand his own abilities more at the moment. His community relied on it. I'm ready, Madara, please, teach me. On the other end of his spiritual connection, he heard a gratifying grunt. All right, maybe there's still hope for us. Let me start. First, you should know that the Mangekyo is not like all other jutsu in that even after decades of intense training with my eternal Mangekyo, I was never able to do more than enter someone's mind and possibly view a recent memory. I couldn't subtly hypnotize them or use force to command them to do anything. It seems like my eyes were never suited for it, but you seem to have a natural aptitude for it with Shisui's eyes, especially since it was the first technique you unlocked. The disadvantage is that you might never be able to fully master another Mangekyo technique, such as Fujin or Tsukuyomi. Unlike almost all other Mangekyo techniques, Koto Amatsukami is a complex technique that can be divided into general abilities. This is because the term, distinguishing heavenly kami, literally means, many gods, rather than just one. The ability to enter someone else's mind, as you did with Gaara, is the most important thing. This basis gives rise to other methods. For instance, you can read through someone's memories once you've gained access to their mind. As you get better at it, you can even substitute your own memories for them. The second is the capacity to hypnotize someone without their knowledge, which may have something to do with gently altering memories and influencing how they respond to your words. You'll have to learn how to do this primarily from your own experience because I was never able to do it myself. The command, the most dreaded technique, comes in third. In contrast to subtle manipulation, you can impose your will on someone's mind and make them follow instructions. When Shisui ordered Itachi to kill the Uchiha clan, he was able to accomplish this right away. The difficulty of this technique, which is the most difficult to execute, essentially depends on how much the person dislikes doing the command. It would be relatively simple to have a baker make an extra loaf of bread in the morning if you ordered one. However, it would take a lot more skill and chakra for the command to take effect if you told that baker to quit his job and pursue pottery instead. But I am certain that once it is set forever. Since Itachi had originally intended to kill the clan and was only slightly unsure about it, Shisui was able to order him to do so on his first try. The biggest drawback of Koto Amatsukami, like most eye-contact-based Mangekyo techniques, is that someone with a Sharingan can resist it, and someone with a Mangekyo can break out entirely. Someone with a Sharingan will be able to resist it once they realize they are being hypnotized. They cannot, however, break out of a command, unless they are terribly outmatched in terms of spiritual chakra, which is very unlikely. This leads us to the Amekage problem we are currently facing. Perfected with Senju chakra, the Rinnegan is the ultimate form of the Sharingan. I am aware that the Amekage can use Koto Amatsukami, and he has seen the Sage's Stone. He has previously used it to access your subconscious. He probably knows that he is being hypnotized and can defy any orders. Therefore, if you try to use it on him, you run a serious risk. His stomach fell into a pit of dread. What? Can't I use the Amekage with it? Shall I inform the Hokage that it's useless? And I've had him in my head before. What time was this? You ran into the Amekage on your way to training a long time ago, but I can assure you that it was an accident. When he sensed my presence, he entered your subconscious. There was absolutely nothing you could have done to stop him at that point, so there was no use in telling you. Remember that Koto Amatsukumi's first choice is to use eye contact to enter someone else's head. If you want to, you can actually use this ability to speak directly to someone's mind, just like I'm doing right now. That was the only thing the Amekage did. Maybe you can get in touch and have a private conversation with the Amekage if you want to. Alternatively, you could invite him into your thoughts. For better or worse, it didn't take more than another half hour for them to see a distant figure approaching along the main road. The village entrance had been closed in preparation for this, so there shouldn't be any random people walking along the road at a time like this. Time passed slowly and silently as they waited for the Amekage to arrive. Naruto had a lot to process and think about before then. The figure appeared to be wearing the distinctive cage hat, but the Amekage would not be traveling alone, and the figure was still a mile or two off, so he might still be seeing things. Naruto squinted his eyes to get a better look as the figure approached, and at first he thought he was seeing things. He raised his hands to rub his eyes and get used to the bright morning rays that were barely penetrating the surrounding canopy. When he opened his eyes again, he saw that the Amekage was standing about 10 feet ahead of them, and fortunately, he was able to avoid breaking the ominous silence by shrieking out. Instead, he took a sharp breath and stood up a little straighter as he took in as many details as he could. Perhaps the first strange thing he noticed was that the Amekage's outfit was completely different from the typical cage standard, except for the shape of the hat. His actual outfit resembled that of the Akatsuki with the three-bladed scythe behind him, except that it was white with the same red swirling clouds instead of black, and his hat was mostly black, which contrasted sharply with his white outfit, and instead of the kanji for rain, as Naruto had anticipated, it displayed the kanji for Akatsuki. Salutations, Amekage the Lord. It is my great honor to be the first to welcome you to the Hidden Leaf Village. The Hokage said, thankfully breaking the frightful silence with a cheerful, light voice as though he had anticipated the Amekage's unexpected appearance in front of them. Would you mind telling me if you came here by yourself or if we should wait for your group to catch up? Instead, the Amekage's head turned as he apparently looked at everyone in front of him, and although Naruto couldn't see his eyes because the big, traditional hat covered most of his face, he held his breath to keep from gasping when he eventually made eye contact with the legendary Rinnegan, who Madara claimed he had encountered before but Naruto honestly couldn't recall anything about. Get ready to use your Mangekyo. He might be attempting to use Koto Amatsukumi against everyone. The Amekage's smooth turning abruptly stopped when they met eyes, and Naruto held his breath for the longest moment as he waited for some kind of probe into his mind. Fortunately, the Amekage eventually turned back to the Hokage, who was still patiently waiting for a response. Naruto swallowed nervously, and in about a second, his crimson Sharingan finally connected with the gray spirals of the Rinnegan. His deep baritone voice was loud enough for everyone to hear him reply, I'm not alone, Zetsu. What was Zetsu trying to say, and Naruto's thoughts stopped dead in their tracks when he saw one of the most bizarre and frightening things he had ever seen, right next to the Amekage, a green monster started to grow out of the ground with a smoothness that was hard to describe. It resembled a Venus flytrap enclosing a man who was actually half black and white down the middle, pitch black and perfectly white, with unsettlingly yellow eyes. The monster, whom the Amekage had named Zetsu, was dressed in a high-collared shirt, just like the other Akatsuki behind him. Hidan, at my side, the Amekage ordered, his eyes still fixed on the Hokage. Naruto could not tell if the notorious Cage liked to make people uncomfortable, but he was definitely succeeding in that endeavor. He sensed an odd presence move beneath him, and not unlike the giant Zetsu, Hidan swiftly materialized from a shadow in the ground beside the Amekage, complete with three-bladed scythe. This will be my entourage for the duration of the exams, Lord Hokage. Still unfazed by the ninjas in front of him, the Hokage nodded. Oh, excellent. Then, even though Hidan has been with us for the past month or so, I would like to welcome the three of you. No matter how long you stay with us, I'm sure you'll discover that. Naruto's eyes were fixed on the Amekage as the Hokage continued his eloquent welcome speech, so when the man's Rinnegan suddenly turned and made eye contact with him once more, his heart naturally skipped a beat, but only for a brief moment. Perhaps he was dreaming. But after a few moments, he felt a strange force touch his mind, a chakra that was clearly the Amekage's. Instead of waiting for his mind to be read, Naruto swiftly reached down into the well of his spiritual chakra, where his evil chakra lay dormant, dimly kindling like a fire waiting to devour a forest. With a single blow, the chakra soured up into his eyes as if it had been waiting for him to ask, ready to rise to the current challenge and defend him. It was all or nothing now, and the Amekige's flaming eternal Mangekyo Sharingan made contact with his cool, dark Rinnegan when their eyes briefly locked again. Naruto banished the alien presence from the head and traced it back to its origin, entering the leader of Akatsuki's mind, using the Amekige's spiritual chakra as a tether. The realm of the sage, Naruto. The first thing that struck Naruto when he opened his eyes was that everything seemed much darker, and it sounded like he was in the middle of a heavy rainstorm. Naruto had only ever entered Gaara's subconscious before, whose mind had appeared before him like a giant green orb of chakra, so it was safe to say that he had never experienced this before. But as he blinked and rubbed his eyes to get used to the lower lighting, he realized that this was unlike anything he had ever encountered before. He had been taken to a private meeting room of some kind, with a high ceiling and hard walls, and dimly lit lanterns and a little light that filtered through the curtain that covered what appeared to be the balcony exit. It was raining heavily, and the entire room, with its high ceiling and hard walls, echoed the sound of pouring rain, which was more than Naruto had ever heard during his childhood in the Leaf Village. Where was he, and what had happened? In order to gain a better sense of his location, he made the decision to move in the direction of what he thought was the exit, brushing aside the curtain only to have to quickly shield his eyes from a streak of lightning that flashed across the sky, briefly cutting off the sound of falling rain as thunder cracked loudly behind it. Naruto was in the village hidden in the rain. He stood on a thin metallic balcony and looked down over a vast city that was unlike anything he had ever seen before. It was filled with tall buildings that dwarfed the Hokage's tower, and no building was taller than the one he was standing on. He unconsciously pushed chakra into his feet as he looked over the edge and almost passed out from vertigo, and he saw tiny specks that he thought were people walking in the streets below. One symbol was present throughout the cityscape, though, whether it was on a banner, a billboard, a restaurant roof, or the side of a building, the red cloud of Akatsuki. As different as this mind-entering experience had been from his time with Gaara, this was perhaps the ultimate variation. The Amekage was sitting in one of the chairs in the meeting room he had just left, legs crossed, patiently waiting for Naruto to follow his orders. "Come, have a seat," a familiar deep baritone voice called out to him from the room behind him. He swallowed nervously, and suddenly started to fear that the worst was about to happen. There seemed to be no other option. He swallowed, recalling Madara's earlier warning that he might perish in someone else's mind, and he was certain of his current location, the Amekage's realm. The Amekage explained, possibly observing the bewilderment on Naruto's face as he took a seat across from him in the surprisingly cozy chair. "I initially thought it would be nice to spend my time planning and conversing in a sunny place. I've modeled my subconscious after my favorite meeting room in my tower," the Amekage said. Strangely enough, though, the rain makes me feel calmer. Now that he was sitting across from one of the most notorious and dangerous ninja in the world, the idea that he might use his power to manipulate him seemed, at best, ridiculous. Naruto's throat felt dry, and he opened his mouth to speak, but soon realized that he had nothing smart to say. The safety of his village depended on him clearing his head and thinking logically before he put himself in a hole from which he couldn't get out. The Amekage went on, his piercing and concentric Rinnegan frightening to look at for more than a few seconds. "There's no need to fear for your life, at least for a minute or so. I wanted you to try to get inside my head." When he finally plucked up the courage to speak, his eyes opened in shock and terror. "What, a minute? And Lord Amekage, you wanted me to come here?" When he looked closely at him, the Amekage's spiky orange hair resembled his own blonde hair, and he nodded at him without his big traditional hat. "I remembered seeing you from before, young Jinchuriki," he said. "Both the infamous Madara Uchiha and the nine-tailed demon fox were sealed inside of you. Although I had intended to follow you as you grew older, I was taken aback by how swiftly you gained influence and power. I didn't think you would greet me with the Hokage. I discovered the reason. I knew you had unlocked the Mangekyo as soon as our eyes locked, and I could feel the evil chakra within you." The Amekage stopped once more, gazing at Naruto with an expression that was impossible to read. "Let me guess. The Hokage wanted you to use Koto Amatsukami on me, didn't he?" Naruto tried to control his facial expressions by biting his lip, but he clearly failed. He took too long to come up with a suitable explanation and concluded that lying was not a good idea. "Yes, sir, but if you'll let me explain, it's for a good reason." With a sigh, the Amekage clasped his hands together, fortunately only to extend his fingers and avoid creating any hand seals. "Oh, you will definitely explain," he said. "Even your village leader appears to be ignorant of the true nature of our abilities. For good reason, very few people do. The Uchiha made sure to conceal their abilities so that the other ninjas wouldn't band together and murder them out of fear. In case you were unaware, Koto Amatsukami can be resisted by those who possess the Mangekyu. The Hokage took a chance by using you. Maybe he believed it was worth the risk because Koto Amatsukami can have an impact on people without them ever realizing it. However, he lost that wager. His heart pounded with fear as the Rinnegan's eyes narrowed on him. Tell me, what was your name again, young Uchiha? In the real world, he had the Hokage and Jiraiya to help him if things got ugly, but here he was alone, and he swallowed uneasily, ready to leave the Amekige's mind if he saw an attack coming. He had no intention of fighting in a realm like this that the Amekige could control. Sir, Naruto, you can call me Naruto Uchiha. Very well, Naruto Uchiha, the Amekige said with a grim nod. I have some quick questions for you. As long as you speak the truth, you have nothing to be afraid of. His eyes instantly lowered as he felt movement beneath him, and to his astonishment, his shadow appeared to come to life and slowly extend outward, stretching towards the Amekige. Had he not been friends with Shikamaru as a child, he might never have believed that such a thing could happen, but like the Nara clan's signature jutsu, Naruto found himself suddenly immobilized, confined to his seat, and to his further horror, his body was compelled to imitate the Amekige's movements. What the hell, was this some kind of shadow possession? Didn't the shadow have to come from the caster, not the other way? Before he could question how in the world the Amekige was aware of a superior form of the Nara's hidden jutsu, a giant demon appeared in the air behind the Amekige's position, and all he could do was not scream in terror and flee. Though, as he was soon reminded, he was unable to move at all, so running was out of the question. He had assumed that the man with the scythe, Hidan, was a symbol of death. He appeared to be certain now that whatever demonic ghost was hovering behind the Amekige was a real god of death. The ghost was holding a large scythe in one hand, and a spear-tipped rope in the other hand, which was attached to the bottom of the scythe. I've not yet mastered Koto Amatsukami, the Amekige went on, as the demon continued to appear and expand behind him. It was now at least twice as big as a human, and although Naruto couldn't see its eyes, he could see that it had a bone-chilling smile on its otherworldly face. The entire area of skin that he could see was completely black with a mixture of swirling white lines. I cannot command you to tell me the truth, the Amekige went on. However, I have a contract with Jashin, a different god, thanks to the Rinnegan. I would beg you to respond truthfully and to answer as quickly as possible. Our souls will now bond with our bodies. When he was done speaking, the demon behind him threw forward his arm, sending the rope spear hurtling through the Amekige and Naruto at a speed he couldn't have avoided if he hadn't been frozen in place. The ethereal blade sank into his chest silently, and he began to feel an unnatural pulling sensation even though he didn't feel any pain. It was time to go out and take his chances. Naruto made a hasty attempt to exit the realm, but to his dismay, he discovered that he was stuck here, secured by the beaming demon whose rope went through both the Amekige and him. What's your name? As though a giant demon of death appeared behind him every day, the Amekige asked in a demanding yet bored tone. Naruto didn't want to wait and see how much time he had to respond, so he felt a tug on his chest and watched in horror as the demon slowly started to pull the rope back with one arm and raise its enormous scythe with the other. Uchiha Naruto. With his eyes fixed on the demon instead of the Amekige, he yelled, I was born Naruto Uzumaki, but ever since I was adopted I'm Naruto Uchiha. The pulling slowed but continued, and he began to see a strange glowing presence being pulled out with the spear. The demon froze, and the scythe started to descend as the rope gradually relaxed. Fortunately, his soul, or what he believed to be his soul if the Amekige hadn't lied, returned to his chest with the rope spear. You have the Mangekyu even though you weren't born a Uchiha? The Amekige asked quizzically. It was perhaps the first human-like expression he had ever seen on the stoic man's face. Naruto didn't have to remind him that he wasn't allowed to lie. Strange. I want to ask you how you got the Mangekyu, but Jashin's Shinigami will get impatient and I don't have any more chakra. Next. Why did you use Koto Amatsukami on me at the Hokage's request? Was it to hypnotize me into servitude or to reveal Akatsuki's secrets? Naruto shook his head and said, no. As soon as he sensed the spear being pulled in his chest once more. As a last resort, the Hokage wanted to use me to persuade you to believe our predicament and assist our village. He wasn't trying to spy on you. As if to see if the demon god would do something, the Amekige cocked his head to the side and waited. Naruto exhaled anxiously as the rope fell loose once more. What specifically did he want you to persuade me of? The Amekige then inquired, continuing to glare down at him with such intensity that Naruto wondered if he was more uneasy staring at the demon or the Rinnegan. Although his heart was still pounding, he found that using the spiritual chakra in his mind helped to calm his nerves. "Lord Amekage," he said, trying to maintain a steady voice, "I've only very recently unlocked the Mangekyo and Koto Amatsukami, and the first person I actually used it on was Gaara, the Jinchuriki from the Sand Village. Through my ability to enter his head, I unintentionally learned that Orochimaru and the Sand Village are planning an attack on us." He hesitated to see how the Amekage would respond, but he figured that waiting would not help him because the rope was still pulling. "Akatsuki has informed us that Orochimaru has defected, but the Hokage needed to confirm that you would assist us in resolving the issue. I believe he either wanted me to ask you to help us or wanted me to find out if you were going to attack us or help us." The rope slackened again after a moment. How could this Shinigami have known that Naruto was accurately stating the whole truth? The Amekage finally said, "Very well," and held up a single hand seal, saying, "That will do for now." The demon's gleeful smile changed to an irritated frown for the first time since it first appeared, and he watched in sudden terror as it yanked its arm backwards, but nothing but the rope spear ended up sailing back to him through the Amekage. It looked disappointed. Naruto was certain that if he had lied, the demon would have somehow devoured his soul. What a terrifying power. It wasn't every day that you got to see a bit of your soul being pulled out by what appeared to be a soul-eating demon. The Amekage sighed as the demon slowly vanished into nothing and sat down in the seat. Naruto, much to his delight, discovered that he could move on his own and sat down as well, albeit with a breath of relief. The Amekage finally spoke to Naruto again after a minute of silence that he didn't want to interrupt. "As much as I'd like to question you further, I need to conserve as much chakra as I can. Naruto, I appreciate that you chose to tell the truth to me. You'd be shocked at how many people choose to put Jashin to the test by telling a half-truth or a lie. Stupid people." As he waited for the Amekage to continue, he flashed a feeble smirk, lacking the energy and motivation to even pretend to laugh. "Consider us even, now," the Amekage declared, his expression less solemn than before, "because I had to use Jashin to defend my village and you had to use Koto Amatsukami to defend yours. After sensing your chakra, I must admit that I was curious to see if you truly possessed the Mangekyo's power. I could have gotten inside your head and talked to you in your subconscious, but Madara would have been involved because that's where he's sealed. I gave you my chakra thread so you could quickly track it back to my own mind and determine whether Madara was using his seal to control you or if you were the one who unlocked the Mangekyo. I'm glad to hear that you arrived here by yourself, without Madara. You're pretty young for someone with that kind of power. You have undoubtedly already experienced a great deal. Maybe, Naruto, you're not all that different from me in that sense." This had been some sort of small test, first to see if Naruto could use Koto Amatsukami himself or if it was just Madara controlling him, and then to see why Naruto was doing it in the first place. Naruto couldn't help but exhale a sigh of relief, as it appeared that the Amekage was not going to kill him, at least not anymore. "Lord Amekage," he found himself asking out of curiosity, and the orange-haired man cocked an eyebrow in return, "What did you and Madara talk about when you were in my thoughts earlier?" The Amekage cocked his head to the side and nodded, as if he was trying to remember something far away. I read rumors about the Sage's tablet at the time, and I think I had made an appearance in the Leaf Village and the Uchiha compound to locate it. I entered your subconscious because I sensed that you had a powerful spiritual chakra. Since Madara would not tell me, I had to use Koto Amatsukami to sort through his memories in order to locate the stone." Naruto was so shocked that he sat up straight. "You used it on Madara. I believed that someone with a Mangekyo couldn't be affected by Koto Amatsukami." The Akatsuki leader finally said, "In most cases, yes," after giving it some thought. "If I recall correctly, I did sense some resistance from him, but I was able to easily overcome it. Perhaps you aren't aware of it yet, Naruto, but Madara didn't have the strong spiritual chakra that pulled me into your subconscious. You owned it. Your current chakra is even more potent than your previous one, and his is weaker. I'm not sure how the tailed beast that sealed Madara inside of you got there, but I've figured that you've been absorbing his spiritual chakra ever since you were born." In retrospect, he vaguely recalled Madara saying that Naruto's spiritual chakra was so powerful because he was absorbing Madara's, so he assumed that wasn't all that new. When the Amekage leaned back in his chair and said, "You don't seem to understand the severity of this problem, so let me explain," Naruto leaned forward, unaware of the nature of the issue, and said, "You've been absorbing Madara's spiritual chakra. As I previously stated, I am not totally certain of the circumstances that resulted in Madara and the Nine Tails being imprisoned inside of you, but I can reasonably assume that he did not choose to do so. Therefore, I assume that the seal was intended for the 9 tails only, not Madara. We have now verified with Madara that whoever is imprisoned inside has their chakra absorbed and channeled into yours over an extended period of time. The Akatsuki leader sighed, but continued anyway, not really understanding the issue, so instead of blurting out something foolish, he held his tongue and waited for the Amekage to continue. The chakra of tail beasts is almost limitless. They have a much larger chakra reserve than humans, and they recover much more quickly without food or sleep. The 9 tails' power will never be completely depleted. However, Madara. He finally understood. Wait, so you're saying that I'm absorbing Madara's spiritual chakra, and my spiritual chakra is far stronger now than when you last met, and Madara's is far weaker. The chakra of Madara is not a limitless supply, the Amekage said with a grim nod. Food, sunlight, water, and other living things all help humans replenish their chakra. Madara has no way to regenerate his chakra, and his life essence and chakra have been permanently sealed inside of you. He doesn't consume food or get energy from you or the 9 tails. You've sucked away his chakra like a well. Naruto concluded for the Lord Amekage, a fitting wave of fear and anxiety finally starting to set in. And eventually his chakra will run out, he said. Holy crap. What will happen after I've absorbed all of Madara's chakra? Will he die? Is he aware? Madara seems to be a smart man, the Amekage said, shrugging. I assume he is aware that his power is no longer regaining. I'm not sure what he intends to do about that. He doesn't appear to be the kind of person who would gladly pass away as another ninja gradually absorbed his chakra. All of this was difficult to accept, and none of it was good, but it made sense to him. Madara didn't eat, sleep, or do anything else inside his seal. He was trapped in stasis, and Naruto was absorbing his chakra. And unlike the 9 tails, Madara's chakra was limited. He would undoubtedly need to discuss this with the Uchiha Patriarch. He would undoubtedly need to be aware of this. Madara might try to deceive him in order to survive. But those thoughts had to wait. He also wondered why the Amekage was sharing this with him in the first place, and what did the leader of Akatsuki stand to gain by spending the time to explain any of this to Naruto. Lord Amekage, he said, trying to sound calm, I appreciate you sharing this with me. I must ask this now on behalf of the Hokage and the Leaf, even though I know you have little reason to care. We need your assistance because Orochimaru is planning an attack on us and is collaborating with the Sand Village. He hesitated and waited to see how the Amekage would respond. Judging by his expressionless face, he seemed to have anticipated this. The Akatsuki leader finally said, interesting, putting his hands together and leaning his chin on them as he thought deeply. And when are Orochimaru and the Sand Village going to launch their attack? We don't know, Lord Amekage, he said, shaking his head and trying to sound appropriate. I was unable to locate the precise information. Since the Sand Village is already inside our gates and we are vulnerable, I believe they intend to attack before they depart tomorrow after the tests. The Amekage nodded his head, apparently already coming up with a plan of his own. Very well, I was informed that the cage typically held a private meeting prior to the start of the exams. I guess I'll be able to learn more about the cage's plans at that time. So you'll assist us? Naruto asked, trying to keep the excitement out of his voice, lest he be reading the situation wrong anyway. You'll be our ally. Unfortunately, the Amekage shook his head and said, Akatsuki has no allies. A pit of dread descended on Naruto's stomach as he said, we have an equally neutral relationship with all of the great villages. However, I do not wish to sour my relationship with the Leaf Village over one of my former commanders. To stop Orochimaru, I'm here. I will destroy them both if it turns out that he has joined forces with the Sand Village against my wishes. Destroy them both? By himself? Was he claiming that he had enough power to do that? Naruto was relieved that they were not enemies at the confident tone in which the Amekage delivered his ultimatum, but he wouldn't be surprised after witnessing the man summon a literal demon with relative ease. He wanted to ask the Amekage a lot of questions. How had he unlocked the Rinnegan? Was he somehow of both Senju and Uchiha ancestry? Had he mastered all the Mangekyu techniques and Sage Mode? Which ones could he use? What powers did the Rinnegan grant? Had Itachi truly chosen to join Akatsuki, as Madara had noted after the massacre? Before Naruto could ask any of his many questions, the Amekage interrupted, saying, one last thing before we leave, you'll need to be present for the meeting with the cage. Unless you are there, your Hokage won't trust me, and he shouldn't. I'll have to use Jashin with the Rinnegan because it uses a lot less chakra than trying to sort through memories with Koto Amatsukami. The Shinigami is only visible to the person being judged, so you'll need to persuade the Hokage that my methods are sound. Madara was correct about one thing. The more people who were aware of his abilities, the more pain he felt in his ass. He fought the urge to moan when he saw the Amekage's slight but noticeable smirk. A sense of humor, huh? Naruto. After an hour. The beginning of Naruto's long day was much more intriguing than he had anticipated. As soon as the Akatsuki leader left the Amekage's thoughts, he asked for a private meeting with the Hokage and Kazekage, with 2 witnesses from each village leader. The Hokage and everyone else looked at him with understandable bewilderment when the Amekage suggested that Naruto be one of the Hokage's assistants and that Zetsu and Hidan accompany him due to the urgency of the meeting. The Hokage replied, "Very well, Lord Amekage," before Danzo or the other 2 former advisors could step in. His eyes were sparkling as he gave Naruto an odd look. "I will bring Naruto with me, as you recommended. And Jiraiya as well." Consequently, he was seated next to the Hokage and Jiraiya in the Hokage's office, with the Amekage occupying the opposite seat and the enormous green monster Zetsu lurking behind him. The scythe-wielding Jonin, Hidan was also idly relaxing on a sofa as he used his blade to pick at his teeth, obviously comfortable with the whole thing. He was tempted to remind everyone that he needed to warm up and study for his final exam later that day, but he made the sensible decision to sip the prepared tea instead. "When I had heard from the Hokage that the Amekage had the Rinnegan, I knew it had to be you." Jiraiya spoke loudly and boisterously, focusing on the Amekage as he addressed the room. "But seeing you with my own eyes is something else entirely. It's been a while, Yahiko. You aren't even going to greet your old sensei with a hug." Looking up at the Sannin to see if he was kidding, he nearly choked on his first sip in sheer surprise. The old pervert appeared serious despite his smile. The old sensei of the Amekage. What on earth was the backstory for that? "That's very much like you, Jiraiya," the Amekage said impassively, or perhaps icily. "Of course you might expect a warm greeting from your old student. But in reality, you should be fearing for your life. I'm not as quick to forget as you are." Jiraiya looked puzzled. "Forget? About what? We had nothing but great times together, the 3 of us. How are Konan and Nagato, by the way? And how in the world did you take out Hanzo? We have a lot to catch up on." Despite Jiraiya's lighthearted demeanor and jokes, Naruto had known him long enough to notice that beneath his wary gaze lay a keen sense of intelligence and wit. Jiraiya was fairly certain, if he had to guess, that he was not friendly with the Amekage. Naruto could have guessed that, too. The room quickly became tense as the Amekage sat quietly, gazing at Jiraiya without showing any signs of amusement. The white-haired Akatsuki appeared mildly intrigued for the first time since Naruto had first seen the frightful-looking Hidan. "Oh no, Jiraiya, did you have to attempt to destroy everything by?" One of the butter knives started to slowly rise into the air, drawing his attention to the table in the middle of them all. It started to slowly rise until it was roughly eye level with the Amekage, at which point it turned and gestured toward Jiraiya. Everyone stiffened. "You abandoned us long ago," the Amekage muttered darkly, his normally stoic and serene face displaying anger. "You no longer have anything to do with us, or Akatsuki. If you continue to pry into our affairs, like I know you've been trying, I will make sure you end up exactly like Hanzo." The tense silence was broken by the Hokage's uneasy shift. "Now everyone, let's forget about our hostilities for the time being and enjoy some of the tea that I have prepared. We have much to discuss this morning. There is no need to pry into Akatsuki and your past." As the floating knife whirled downward toward the teacup set in front of the Amekage, Naruto exhaled in relief. He briefly pondered whether the Amekage possessed the same magnetic talent as Masahiro. When 2 sugar cups floated upward and fell into the teacup while the knife started to stir, his theory was disproved. According to his studies, magnet release was a unique combination of earth and lightning chakra. Eventually, the cup floated cautiously and slowly in the direction of the Amekage's outstretched hand. As though what he had just done wasn't amazing, he took a sip nonchalantly. "What was that kind of power?" "I agree with you," the Amekage finally said, sipping his tea. "There is no need for hostility between us this morning. What's in the past is in the past. And we thank you for the tea, Lord Hokage, it's delicious." The tension at last started to ease for the moment. Being in the midst of a battle between these ninjas was the last thing Naruto wanted to be at the moment. Leaning back and flinging his feet on the table, Hidan finally exclaimed, "Ha!" For the first time since he had entered the room. He almost spilled his tea when he pushed it away with his sandal. "Speak for yourself, sir. This tea tastes like shit to me." Naruto almost choked on his mouthful of tea again in an instant. Did that just occur? He guessed he hadn't just dreamed that since he saw Jiraiya's mouth fall open in shock. After the majority of the room continued to stare at him, Hidan said, "The fuck are you all looking at? I'm just being honest. The tea sucks and you should be ashamed of yourself, Lord Hokage." The Hokage let out a little, sincere laugh in spite of the crass insult. "Is that so? Yes, I do suppose this isn't my finest batch. I'll admit that usually my secretary makes the better pot of tea, but we were rather rushed this morning, were we not? I apologize for my commander's crudeness," Hidan started to say, but the Amekage interrupted. "He follows a strict religion which prohibits lying, and he usually speaks his mind with little filter. I assure you that he has made great social improvements as of recent years, and I consider that one of my greater accomplishments. Hidan, if you've nothing pleasant to say, remain silent." The Reaper with the white hair appeared to want to respond, but he simply shrugged and resumed his teeth picking. Naruto wondered what Hidan had been like in the past, if this was an indication of better social tact. The Amekage folded his hands and said, "Let's just cut to the real reason why I am here this morning," appearing as thoughtful as he had been earlier when he was in his own head. Like Naruto had seen before, he had thrown off his hat to show off his bright orange hair while still dressed in the white Akatsuki outfit. "Naruto explained the situation to me in front of your gates. You believe that the Sand Village is going to join forces with Orochimaru and attack the Leaf Village." For once, there was a hint of surprise on the Hokage's normally composed and unreadable face. It was obvious that the wise old man was not entirely sure how the Mangeku's ocular abilities operated. Without waiting for an answer, the Amekage went on, "As you've no doubt already discovered, Orochimaru used to work for me in Akatsuki. Allow me to be clear, his appearance in this village was approved by me in the beginning as a showing of the faith I had in him. He has since broken that faith, and is no longer a part of my organization. The Akatsuki has no desire to attack the Leaf." For Naruto, at least, this was good news. The old man began to laugh as he fumbled for his pipe, suggesting that the Hokage agreed with him. "Ah, I'm glad to hear that, Lord Amekage," he said, lighting the pipe with the tip of his finger while holding it in his mouth. "Forgive me for finding this situation a little funny. But how would you feel if I were to give Orochimaru amnesty and allow him to work in the Leaf Village once again?" Naruto's eyes widened in shock. What? Rinnegan of the Amekage, who apparently did not find the situation nearly as funny, narrowed his eyes dangerously at the Hokage. "Orochimaru knows too much about the inner workings of Akatsuki. The penalty for betraying me is death." "Really?" the Hokage asked, inhaling deeply and exhaling smoke into the air of the office. "So, you can offer him amnesty when he betrays the Leaf Village, but I cannot do the same when he betrays yours. Do you perhaps see the hypocrisy in all of this?" The Amekage calmly responded, "Perhaps, Lord Hokage," without recoiling at the audacious comments. "But I have learned from your mistakes. Unlike you, I have not allowed anyone in my village to outmatch me in strength. I have the power to enforce Orochimaru's execution, while your village never truly did. You should be thanking me for taking in someone like Orochimaru, who you could not contain. Had he not joined Akatsuki, I'm sure at some point he would have returned to destroy the Leaf Village, and I wouldn't be here to stop him. I am likely saving many of your people's lives by helping you." In terrified silence, Naruto glanced between the two cages. On the couch, the Hokage tapped impatiently for a while before he sighed and puffed out another stream of smoke. "What you did was wrong, Lord Amekage, and you know it. But nonetheless I cannot help but thank you for taking responsibility for Orochimaru, where I could not. You're right, Orochimaru grew too wild and too strong. In the end, I chose not to stop him when I could have. And in the end, perhaps not even I had the strength to stop him at all. Rest assured, Lord Hokage, I have the strength," the Amekage said in a quiet voice. "Orochimaru will die for betraying the Akatsuki, that much is guaranteed. What I wish to discuss with you now is whether or not the Kazekage will die with him." A knock on the door cut off their conversation as if on cue, and Naruto's gaze jerked to the door. For the first time, Zetsu said, "It's the Kazekage," in a gravelly, dark voice. The Amekage nodded and looked at the door as it started to open, saying, "And one other." Not for the first time, and most certainly not the last, Naruto felt very uneasy and wondered how he got into this kind of meeting. The Kazekage strode into the room, removing his big green and white hat and setting it on a nearby rack. "Greetings, Lord Hokage, Lord Amekage," he said curtly. The man in the circle of leaders slumped into the open seat, and Naruto sat up straight. His assistant, who appeared to be an unidentified Jonin aide, chose to stand silently behind him. My apologies for my tardiness. I must say that I have not had an enjoyable week, having fallen ill for some time, and I come bearing news that neither of you will like to hear. The man had dark brown hair and dark rings around his eyes, which Naruto had never even seen in a human being until Gaara. He appeared to be middle-aged, older than the Amekage but much younger than the Hokage. In retrospect, he realized that the man also resembled a taller Gaara significantly. Is there a connection between them? After reaching forward to grab a gulp of water from the coffee table in the middle of the group, the Kazekage asked again, is this room secure? This is top secret information. I couldn't even trust to a messenger hawk to send it before arriving. Are your escorts qualified and trusted? After exchanging glances with the Amekage, the Hokage responded. Yes, this room is secure and our escorts are qualified. Please, Lord Kazekage, share what's been bothering you. After rushing another gulp of water and running a tense hand through his hair, the exhausted Kazekage leaned back and glanced at the other two village chiefs. Orochimaru is planning on attacking this village. Tomorrow, after the conclusion of the exams and the final awards and promotion ceremony, he plans on attacking in full force. Naruto was so shocked that he couldn't help but open his mouth. What? Wait a minute, please. Did the Kazekage not intend to attack them in addition to Orochimaru? Why on earth would the Kazekage be publicly acknowledging that an attack was imminent? You're probably wondering how I know this, the Kazekage added, his face displaying concern. And to be honest, I'm worried in some way that Orochimaru will still find out. Let me explain. A few months ago, Orochimaru started contacting me on behalf of Akatsuki, telling me that Akatsuki was going to form an alliance with the Sand Village in order to destroy the Leaf, and that if we didn't accept the plans, Akatsuki would offer the same services to the Leaf Village instead. He said that if we made contact with the Leaf Village, Akatsuki would launch a full-scale attack on the Sand. I tried to get in touch with you, Lord Amekage, but not a single messenger hawk could get through, and Orochimaru warned me that any further attempts to stray from the plan would result in the destruction of the Sand Village. Of course, I was hesitant about all of this, but rather than jeopardize the safety of my village, I chose to comply until I met you in person, since you would be there for the finals. The Leaf informed us about a week ago that Orochimaru had been seen in your village and had betrayed Akatsuki. I was aware that Orochimaru was attempting to deceive us at the time. Even without your backing, Lord Amekage, he was attempting to win the Sand Village over to his cause. He's always one step ahead of me, though, in one way or another. Already, a number of my advisors have vanished. Yesterday, I met with Orochimaru himself to make sure the attack would proceed according to plan. It was clear that someone was lying, but Naruto didn't know who it was. Orochimaru couldn't have been so naive as to think that the Kazekage would believe him without question, especially since he knew that the Kazekage would meet the Amekage prior to the start of the finals. Was the Kazekage lying to them now, attempting to make them less vigilant? With the iron-hard face of an experienced leader, the spiky, orange-haired man stood up and walked around until he was standing over the other village leader. Lord Kazekage, the Amekage's voice, which sliced through the room like a whip, demanded everyone's attention. I am going to ask you a few questions, as I will not have myself or the Hokage fooled by either your lies or Orochimaru's. Recognize that you will perish if you tell even the smallest lie. Don't put me to the test. You get it. The old man didn't play around when it came to the safety of the Leaf, apparently even going so far as to kill another Kage. The Kazekage looked fearfully at the Hokage, but Hiruzen nodded back, and to Naruto's surprise, his eyes were as hard as steel. The Kazekage finally stood and faced the Amekage, saying, I have nothing to hide from you. I don't understand the power of the Rinnegan, but it doesn't matter, I'm telling the truth. If you're satisfied with that, oh my god, what is that? Then go ask your questions. The Kazekage rose suddenly, adopting the Amekage's stance, and Naruto, who was all too aware of what the man was likely seeing at the moment, chose to remain silent and wait to tell the Hokage what was going on. The Kazekage's question was promptly addressed by the Amekage. Are you planning to launch an assault on the Leaf Village with Orochimaru? No, the Kazekage replied, I do not wish to attack the Leaf Village, still gazing fearfully over the Amekage, undoubtedly at the invisible Shinigami behind him. As Naruto waited for the Amekage to proceed, he held his breath because he knew from experience that the Shinigami would be removing his soul right now if what the Kazekage had just said wasn't the whole truth. After a few long moments of silence, it didn't appear that the cage was in any pain at all. Has Orochimaru been giving you the impression that Akatsuki wanted to form an alliance with you? The Imekage went on in a foreboding manner. Yes, everything I just told you is the truth, the cage replied quickly once more. Unless we believed that our personal safety was in danger, the Sand Village would never think of attacking the Leaf Village. When I came here, I just wanted to make sure, and I was ready to put my troops down if necessary. Naruto saw a bead of sweat on the man's forehead and wondered how much chakra it actually took to use Jashin. After a few more moments, the Imekage sat back down in his seat, and the cage sighed with relief before doing the same. The cage is telling the truth, the Imekage declared, slowly reaching forward to grab the cup of tea in front of him. What? Jiraiya finally broke the silence, slightly shaking his head in disbelief. That's it. You asked him some questions just now. How can we be sure he's telling the truth? Instead of answering, the Imekage looked at Naruto, who swallowed uneasily when he saw that everyone in the room had suddenly turned to look at him, presumably because he was supposed to explain to them all the power of the Imekage. We can trust the Imekage's verdict, he said, his voice trembling more than he had hoped, because the Imekage used a technique that calls forth the god of death, Jashin, said Lord Hokage. If they don't tell the whole truth, the other person will die while he's using the technique. I was there when the Imekage first came and saw Jashin. If the cage possessed anything like, get your facts straight, fuckboy, Hidan decided to say, interrupting Naruto in the middle of his sentence. Jashin is the god of death, a fucking elder god. Not even our fucking dimension will permit him to exist. The Imekage simply calls forth one of Jashin's higher-ranking Shinigami to carry out his orders, regardless of the bullshit contract he uses. I'd understand how these things operate. For several centuries, I have been a member of the Order. He wouldn't have had any trouble not believing him if Hidan had told him that yesterday, but after seeing a Shinigami pull out his own soul earlier that day, Naruto didn't even know how to react to such a ridiculous claim. Finally turning the focus back to himself, Naruto went on, I don't fully understand how it works, I can only say that the cage told us the truth. The remainder of the meeting proceeded under the presumption that the cage was on their side, which altered the majority of the Hokage's plans with the village's protection. However, the Hokage and Jiraiya were naturally pleased to hear that the cage would also be helping them fight Orochimaru, in addition to the Imekage's willingness to do so. To his delight, the Hokage let Naruto go and get ready for the Chunin finals, which were set to begin in an hour or two, before the leaders got into the details of devising a new strategy. Later, Naruto, with a million ideas racing through his head, Naruto had left the Hokage's tower in the final hours before he was supposed to be at the stadium and made the decision to go to some familiar grounds to calm down. He went straight to Team 7's training grounds on the far outskirts of the village, where he eventually stopped and collected his thoughts after arriving at the memorial at the edge of the training grounds. It felt like he had just graduated from the academy with his two best friends, and Shisui had said that the Hokage had discovered their cunning scheme to join the same team and set up a fabricated test for them to take before they were officially made genin. Hinata-chan had ended up tied to a log. He had felt terrible at the time, but now he couldn't help but laugh. The name of his older brother, Shisui Uchiha, was immediately visible when he turned his dark eyes toward the memorial stone in front of him. Although the Uchiha had their own separate memorial in the village, Shisui's name was also present because he had been killed while on a mission. Yo, Naruto. Naruto swerved slightly in surprise when he heard Kakashi-sensei approaching him. The gray-haired sensei, wearing his usual mask, was walking with a book in one hand that he was reading, and he couldn't help but grin when he saw the title. So Kakashi also enjoyed the Ika Ika series. How was your big meeting with the Hokage? Kakashi said. Fancy meeting you here, pausing next to him, both of them facing the stone. He shrugged and sighed, saying, Orochimaru still plans on attacking the village, it seems, but it doesn't seem like the Sand Village is on his side. That's better than we had expected, at least, Kakashi said, nodding and closing his book in his side pocket. At some point tonight, the Hokage will probably gather all of our shinobi to get us ready for battle. A warning order has already been given to the Anbu and Jonin. For a brief moment, there was silence between them as they both kept their eyes on the stone. The cool wind in the trees was starting to gather a variety of falling and colorful leaves, a sign of the ever-changing seasons. Naruto couldn't help but think that he had never really had the chance to get to know Kakashi-sensei, and that he had been so angry after Shisui's death. Angry that Shisui had been betrayed and angry that the Hokage had believed that Kakashi could simply replace Shisui. After a while, Kakashi said, "You know Naruto," tilting his head to the side and looking at him. "I'm a little disappointed that you didn't attend any of my training sessions this month." For all of them, Sasuke was present. "It wouldn't surprise me if he kicked your ass." Knowing that it was a purposeful low blow, Naruto sneered, unwilling to accept it without a fight. Sasuke, fat luck. Additionally, I have been training and picking up some new skills over the past few weeks rather than just lounging around. I have a strong suspicion that the Hokage will promote me straight to Special Jonin after reviewing my matches. Then you won't be able to outrank me. You shouldn't be so quick to leave behind Team 7, Naruto, Kakashi said, turning back to face the stone. Did you know that I actually kept working with my previous Genin team after I was promoted to Jonin? For as long as possible, you should make an effort to work and ask for missions with your team. Naruto could agree with that much. Even if he was promoted to Chunin or Special Jonin after the exams, he wanted to continue working with Sasuke and Hinata-chan for as long as the Hokage would let him. Where are your teammates at the moment? I heard that you worked with the Anbu before this, Naruto said, turning to face his sensei. Why did you choose to leave your team behind? With a sigh, Kakashi answered in his typically upbeat manner, my former team. They're all on this stone in front of me, actually. I'm the final one. Immediately regretting asking the question, Naruto turned to face the stone memorial and looked back at the incredibly long list of names engraved on it, killed in action. There were a lot of Leaf Shinobi here, and he surmised that not many ninjas ever reached the rank of Jonin without having some of their friends and teammates end up on this stone. Kakashi continued, looking down with a hint of sadness, Obito and Rin are on this stone, adding, and of course, my sensei, Minato Namikaze. I learned the value of sacrifice and perseverance from each of them. To protect the village, they all sacrificed their lives. The fourth had been Kakashi's Jonin sensei, but did he just say Minato Namikaze? Did he mean Naruto's father? Kakashi finally went on, ninja teams may not always last long, turning to face Naruto. But you should cherish your teammates while you can, he said, removing any sadness Naruto had previously experienced and replacing it with his typical amiable demeanor. It's unlikely that you will ever find a closer bond in your life. And when it comes to teammates, Kakashi looked over their shoulder, and Naruto did the same, barely noticing a movement behind one of the wooden logs across the clearing. To Naruto's annoyance, Kakashi patted him on the head and ruffled his hair, saying, I won't bother you anymore, with a faint chuckle in his voice. Good luck today, Naruto. I'm proud of you regardless of the result, and I can't wait for our team to reunite once this is all over. Jiraiya informed me that although he will be serving as your direct supervisor, you are still welcome to occasionally accompany us on missions. The masked Jonin turned and started to leave, but he turned around with a playful gleam in his eye before he could get away. Oh, and last thing, he said. Fraternization is prohibited, aren't you aware? Fraternization? Not sure what that had to do with anything, he asked. According to our shinobi law, fraternization with a ninja of 2 lower ranks is prohibited unless you already have a relationship. I just thought that if you were hoping to be promoted to Special Jonin, you should know that. Damn him. Naruto began to question how many people were aware of him and Hinata and why he seemed to be the last to discover the truth. A few minutes before, it was an eerie dimension, perhaps closer to the spirit world than the real one, with its monochromatic world, trees that bent with the wind but no rustling, birds that hopped from branch to branch but no singing, Kakashi and Naruto speaking nearby but no sound coming from their lips, and somewhat transparent bodies that were lit by the bright glowing souls visible within them. Is it painful? Reunited with them. Near the edge of the forest clearing, 2 figures emerged, intently observing Naruto and Kakashi's silent conversation in front of the ninja memorial. The shorter figure, wearing a black cloak that appeared to be made of shadow and carrying a staff on his back, was leaning against a tree trunk with his arms crossed and his face concealed behind a metallic dark mask, leaving only his eyes exposed. Not anymore. No, he finally said, looking at the training logs nearby. He saw Hinata, a bright soul, trembling as she tried to hide behind one of the logs, which nearly made him smile, but not quite. I guess I just feel empty, he said. Above, the taller figure sat on one of the larger branches, feet hanging playfully in the air. This man was also dressed in a muted style appropriate for any ninja. Perhaps the only color in this eerie world was his bright orange mask. Ha! The man in the orange mask replied, his laugh as real as any. Good one, Saito. Full of jokes, as always. But believe me, it's for the best. Saito, the shorter figure, shrugged indifferently, returning his focus to the ghosts of Naruto and Kakashi. He hadn't seen them for more than a month, but it seemed like a year. A person will experience that after activating the Mangekyu. He was aware that Naruto had also unlocked the Mangekyu, albeit in a different manner, based on the memory flashes he occasionally saw in his dreams. He recalled experiencing death, agony, and torture during the fleeting moments he saw in his visions. Then there was fire, black flames, hatred. Leaping from the tree, the taller man knelt beside Saito, and the two of them watched Kakashi and Naruto talk. I always enjoy returning to the Leaf Village, you know. It fills me with determination. I want to save this place. I want to save the whole world. But that all comes later. Do you remember our mission? Under his metal mask, Saito grinned, but no one could ever see it. Of course, Toby, we're going to stop by my favorite ramen bar, and drown my existential sorrows in noodles and sake. Bingo, Toby said, giving him another laugh. A fine plan if I've ever heard one. But first, we need you to get eyes on the Sage's tablet, and then we need to gather more intel on the Amekage while we're here. You noticed him this morning, didn't you? Yeah, Saito said, recalling what had happened earlier in the morning. Now he turned to face the three glowing, bright souls in front of him. I thought his soul would be a lot brighter, but it was definitely dimmer than everyone else's. Like mine. For a moment, the two of them watched silently. Two idiots who have no business being alive. Both were abandoned and forgotten. Phantoms, who prefer to haunt this world rather than go on to the next one. At last, Saito said, "What about you, Toby?" After Kakashi and Naruto had nearly finished their conversation, Kakashi started to move away from the stone. You're not a clone, like me. You could stumble through the gates one day and the village would celebrate your return. Are you ever tempted to go back to a normal life? When Kakashi started walking straight at them, neither of them batted an eye. The tone of Toba's voice darkened. I don't think I'd find a place in this village or be welcomed. I know too much. Danzo would try to kill me within a week. And, most importantly, I can't forgive the Leaf Village for betraying its own ninjas. You and I are actually more alike than you realize. I don't want to return. Now that I have these eyes, everything appears different. Madara used to tell me that hatred is the only thing that the Mangekyu can do. I'm not sure I agree with it entirely, though. The Mangekyu, in my opinion, is merely an unfinished Rinnegan, but it is capable of more than just using hatred. Both you and I emptied our hearts, minds, and souls in order to unlock Kamui. If we just knew, I'm beginning to wonder if we could figure out how to unlock even more techniques. But neither of the intruders tried to hide, and Toby actually held out his hand as Kakashi passed. The silver-haired Jonin just phased through without any awareness and continued walking down the forest path. After all, both Saito and Toby were slashed into a separate dimension, one of many on the spectrum between this world and the spirit world. Toby hesitated for a moment as the brightly lit Kakashi finally approached them. Toby finally declared, "Unless you want to go back to your original story," as he saw Saito's mask turn to face Hinata. At the very least, it appears that you will win the girl if you merge with Naruto again and give him your soul fragment. Orochimaru might kill them all, so this might be your last chance as well. Saito turned away from Naruto and Hinata after giving it some thought. Stop playing around, Toby. It's going to be a long day. Let's explore further. And the two of them vanished with a snap of Toba's fingers. Naruto. Instead of just calling out to his not-so-sneaky friend after Kakashi had left, Naruto pressed chakra into his legs and leapt into the air, skillfully backflipping and turning so that he would land directly on top of the log that Hinata-chan was currently hiding behind. The landing was quieted by the chakra in his feet, but she felt something because her back was pressed against it. She began to turn around, and he was able to lean down in time so they were only a few feet apart. Hiya, Hina-chan. Hinata-chan always had this effect on him. She could make the new burning hatred in his heart feel like a distant sensation and bring a genuine smile to his face faster than anyone else. I said with a vibrant smile, genuinely feeling happy for the first time since he woke up. She shrieked and jumped backward, causing him to laugh. Naruto-kun, I just wanted to say good luck to you, but you were talking with Kakashi-sensei, and I didn't want to interrupt, but as I waited for you I realized how weird it would seem for me to be here, and I am. She said hesitantly, blushing slightly as her cheeks began to flush. Her eyes strayed from his, and she brought her fingers together in her typical fidgeting habit. Don't worry about it, he said casually, putting his hands back in his pockets, as he jumped down in front of her and put a finger to her lips to cut her off. Her lips were soft, and it reminded him of last night, which made his heart race. He wanted to kiss her again, but he was afraid she would be upset if he simply leaned in and kissed her now. He had taken a chance by kissing her last night, and although she had undoubtedly returned the kiss, he didn't want to do it again until they were both in agreement. As he watched her face gradually start to flush from their closeness, he declared with confidence, "You know that I won't need luck, especially for my first fight. I've spent almost every night figuring out exactly how I'm going to ruin Neji." Her face fell when her cousin was mentioned, and Naruto knew what she was probably going to say next. He had vowed to bring Neji closer to Hinata-chan just because she had been so close to death during the preliminary round, and the thought of it made his heart burn with hatred, but he knew that despite his hatred, Hinata-chan had a golden heart and that she wouldn't want him to kill Neji, even if the bastard deserved it. Please don't give in to your hatred," she finally said to him, unable to maintain his stern stare for very long. "You wouldn't be any better than him if you killed Neji. Neji hates us for a reason. Do you recall?" Yes, he recalled. Neji blamed him and Hinata for his father's death, but from his perspective, the Hyuga clan was to blame. He felt that Hiyashi's outburst was uncalled for because the Hyuga had enslaved half of their members and he wanted to spend time with Hinata despite knowing that the Hyuga had been abusing her on a daily basis. Instead of blaming Hinata-chan, Neji should focus his ire on correcting the Hyuga clan. "Regardless of your feelings, Neji is a formidable opponent," Naruto said ominously, his voice lowered as the evil chakra gradually started to creep up to his eyes. "Remember that this Chunin exams is a fight to the death. I will be killed if I enter the fight with my guard down. I'm confident he won't hold back. Hinata-chan, I won't promise you anything." She stepped toward him and shook her head, saying, "I know that. Naruto-kun, I am aware of that. However, I am aware that your newfound power causes emotional turmoil and anger when the battle is over and you are satisfied with your victory." Naruto shook his head to get his thoughts straight, saying, "I'm in control of my new powers, Hinata-chan. Hinata didn't deserve to be lashed out at by Neji or by him. He could save his anger for later. You need not be concerned." As much as he wanted to stay with Hinata and talk about what had happened between them last night, the atmosphere had been ruined, and he didn't have time to waste. He glanced at his watch. He had about an hour before he had to be ready for the matches to start. He briefly smiled at her before turning to head towards the stadium because he had too many things on his mind right now, including Orochimaru's plot, Neji, the Imekage, his kiss with Hinata-chan, and the thousands of people waiting to. "Hi Naruto-kun, hold on." He turned around when he felt a tug on his sleeve and saw that Hinata had once again closed the distance, her long dark hair blowing softly in the wind, forcing her to tuck away a few strands that had fallen in front of her golden eyes. She whispered softly, "Thank you, Naruto-kun," as she gripped his arm even more tightly while looking down once more. "Thank you, yesterday was the happiest day of my life." Her soft words went directly to his heart, sending a shockwave through his entire body, driving out all the anger inside him. He could no longer doubt how much she cared for him, and perhaps more significantly, he realized how much he cared for her after last night. In the end, he said, "Me too," as he saw her face light up with joy. He reached out to her grabbing hand and gently held it in both of his, not wanting to make any bold statements in the moment, but conveying to her how important this was to him. He said, "We should go on more dates like that together, if you want." Without injuring herself, she could not have nodded more enthusiastically. "Yes, I do, of course." Grinning, he squeezed her hand and released it. "Excellent, I'll be anticipating it, then." Turning slowly to depart once more, "Why I take it that you have no intention of dating other girls?" Before he could turn around, she grabbed his hand and asked. That was a strange question. Clearly he wasn't going to go on dates with anyone other than Hinata. He gave her a funny look. "No," he said, shaking his head and looking at her in some confusion. "It's just you, Hinata-chan. Why did you ask?" She took deep breaths to calm herself before breaking eye contact with him and looking to the side, but when she turned back to him, her glare had an odd, fiery intensity. "So, you're basically agreeing that you only go out on dates with me?" She was probably the only one who would agree to go out and eat at ramen bars with him as much as he wanted, but he chose not to bring that up. Yeah, I guess," he said quickly, wondering where she was going with this. "You're the only girl I would ever dream on going on a date." If we only go out on dates with each other, then that would mean that we're dating, right? She said, failing to conceal a twitch in her lips and a certain mischievous twinkle in her eye. His stomach sank into a pit of unexpected, heavy responsibility. Oh no, this is where she was heading. I guess you could say it like that, he said nervously, scratching the back of his head sheepishly. He had wanted to put this conversation on hold until he had something special planned and wasn't so distracted by everything else, but it seemed like she was just going ahead with her own plan. Crap, if he didn't end this conversation now, there would be no avoiding. Would I be allowed to consider myself your girlfriend then? Her eyes met his, and she blinked several times. Naruto would have been thrilled to have Hinata-chan as his official girlfriend, but he was also devastated that she had jumped the gun and essentially asked him first. He had been hoping to wait for the exams to be over, go on a romantic date, hold her hand somewhere romantic, and ask her somewhere special to them. Something that had to be perfect, something that Hinata-chan deserved, something that would allow them to create a wonderful memory together and cherish it for the rest of their lives. He could see that she was at the peak of her emotions, just a breath away from either happy laughter or sad tears, but there was also a playful sparkle in her eyes that told him that her initial nervousness had to be in act. She had undoubtedly planned this whole thing, and he had fallen for it. She had likely known that he was going to do something special, but she couldn't just wait the few extra days, could she? She had cornered him into making the decision now, and he could tell that asking for more time to consider it would not go well. But really, she couldn't wait another day. So much for organizing a special date and finally finding the courage to confess. He looked around and couldn't help but notice the logs behind Hinata-chan and began to laugh again. This was probably payback for him kissing her yesterday. No, this was probably payback for him taking so long to ask her to be his girlfriend. What? She said, a very serious scowl on her face as he continued to laugh. What's so funny? I'm just thinking about how lame of a place this is to have this conversation, he decided to openly share, his contagious smile making her pouting lips twitch upward as he shook his head and reached out to hold both of her hands. Do you really want to do this here? Shisui tied you up against that log after we nearly failed his test, and now you're practically leaning against it. That was actually a great memory for me, Naruto-kun, she said, causing him to raise an eyebrow in confusion, pausing for a moment to gather her thoughts, and I was feeling useless and helpless back then, tied against this log and hungrier than I could ever remember being. She suppressed the giggle he knew was about to break out, instead forcing her face back into her serious look that demanded his action. I questioned whether I would ever be able to get to you because you and Sasuke seemed to be so far ahead of me, or whether finding a new partner would be more beneficial for the two of you. At last, she began to smile as she glanced up at him, but you chose to share your food with me. You didn't abandon me. They were teammates, and he wouldn't abandon her even if it meant jeopardizing his own health, but he couldn't recall much of what he had said to her at the time, let alone the feelings. He replied, attempting to reframe the situation, well, I guess this place does hold some sentimental value to us, adding, this was where we officially became teammates, and realized our dream from back at the academy of becoming ninja together. Since she wasn't giving him a way out, she squeezed his hands until they were almost painful. Well, then, it might as well be face to face. Would you like to be my girlfriend, Hinata-chan? I would have loved to ask you that after a proper date, but I guess you couldn't wait, and since we're already in the same place that he asked her, observing her eyes light up instantly and her composure start to waver. She couldn't control the smile that was spreading across her face, mirroring his. He already knew what she was going to say, he assumed the truth had always been there, they just needed to finally put it in words. Yes, she promptly cut him off, jumping into arms with a burst of joyful laughter that could cure any illness. If he hadn't expected exactly that reaction, he probably would have been knocked over completely, but instead he managed to spin her around in the air. Yes. This was only the beginning, and now that they had arrived, he could begin to look forward to the things they'll never forget. He still wasn't entirely sure where they would go from here. Would this glowing feeling inside his chest eventually burn out, or was it true love destined to last? In the end, that didn't matter to him, they'd figure it out. What mattered most was that he knew she cared about him, no, even more than that. She liked him, just as much as he liked her. In other places, this had been the longest week in the Cage's life, without a doubt. Ever since Orochimaru had arrived in the Sand Village months ago, things had taken a nightmarish turn for the worse, and he had lost many nights of sleep trying to decide what would be best for his village. Should he try to reach out to the Leaf and warn them of Akatsuki's plan? No, surely Orochimaru, as a former Leaf ninja, had some informants in the Leaf's headquarters that would alert him if the case cage had broken the agreement. Eventually, the case cage and his aide arrived in their private suite in the Hokage's tower, where they would be able to rest and plan before the start of Chunin exams. Then what else? Should he try to contact the other great villages? No, that would be suicide. Maybe the lightning, stone, and mist villages would seem helpful at first, but they could just as easily turn against him. He was positive that if the hidden stone village discovered that he was taking his forces to attack the Leaf, the bastard Tsuchikage would attack the sand village when his main forces were gone. Although the great villages were all enemies on paper, he would never let his enemy know when his village would be most vulnerable. To top it all off, he had been bedridden for the past week due to an unexplained illness, and he had been relying on his closest advisor to prepare his army for the worst. However, when they learned that Orochimaru was working independently of Akatsuki, they were able to form an alliance with both Akatsuki and the Leaf, which was the best news he could have ever heard. As he shut and locked the door behind them, his advisor broke off his thoughts, saying, "My lord, I couldn't be any happier with how that meeting went." The man took the case cage's hat from him and hung it on a nearby coat rack, revealing his own head in the process. "Agreed," the case cage muttered, slumping onto a nearby chair and inhaling deeply. "I'm happy that we also have a man like the Amekage on our side. Whatever method he employed to question me was one of the scariest things I have ever experienced, even though I know you couldn't see it. But earning their trust was worthwhile. The three of us can launch a coordinated attack on Orochimaru now that they have faith in us." In a futile effort to combat the excruciating headache that was bothering him, he rubbed his temples. "Alert the head ninja at once. Tell him to withdraw all troops from the village's periphery and to hold off on retreating completely until further orders are given. When Orochimaru discovers we have betrayed him, I don't want him to target us. Additionally, we must ensure that Gaara." A sharp stinging sensation in his shoulder caused him to halt his speech, and he glanced back quickly to see that an odd syringe was now protruding from him. What in the hell could? When his headache abruptly turned into a searing pain unlike anything he had ever experienced before, all thoughts came to a halt. "What? Help," he choked out to his advisor, reaching out a hand before collapsing forward to the ground. His vision began to blur rapidly, but he was still able to look up at his advisor's laughing face, who had put on the ceremonial hat of the case cage for himself. This is how it ended for him. Tricked. Hoo, you did well, case cage, the man said menacingly, his voice never sounding like it usually did. The man reached up to his face and moved his hand to reveal the smirking face of the very last person the case cage wanted to see, Orochimaru. "The most believable act is an honest one," Orochimaru went on, his voice sounding closer by the second. "Of course, I knew that the Amekage can detect falsehoods, so the trick lies in making sure the person being questioned doesn't know the actual truth," he said. "It's really elementary, and that really went so well. They didn't seem shocked when you first brought it up, so it appears they somehow figured out that I was also siding with the Sand Village. I wonder how they learned that. Whatever, I have everything left to do now." Orochimaru's voice trailed off as the case cage felt his consciousness slipping away from him. His eyes were heavy, his body was numb, and he fell asleep for the last time in the middle of all of his plans, dreams, and ambitions. Stadium in Leaf Village. Hinata had walked to the packed stadium close to the village center after parting ways with Naruto almost an hour ago. Her dark hair was pulled back into a ponytail, and she wore a skirt and a light green blouse. The earliest fans had camped out the previous evening to secure the best view along the rails, and thousands of people had been swarming into the stadium since the morning. There was electricity in the air. A strange carnal desire was evoked in people by watching skilled fighters attempt to kill one another in an arena. Death and gambling, of course. There were even stands erected just to wager on which ninja would prevail, a full block from the entrance. She chose to visit one of those stands even though she wasn't particularly interested in gambling. The competitors and their expected skill level were described in pamphlets that were dispersed throughout the surface. She swiftly turned through one and came across a page about Naruto. He was seated last, and the odds were stacked against him, the pamphlet said. Nevertheless, she couldn't help but grin when she saw the silly picture of Genin that was used for his portrait. Then his eyes were so different. He appeared so youthful. The tournament tree was printed on the front of one of the pamphlets. Sasuke, Kimimaro, Utakata, and Shino were on one side, while Naruto, Neji, Gaara, and Masahiro were on the other. Shikamaru was fortunate enough to pass the first round. However, that implied that both Naruto and Sasuke might advance to the tournament finals. She bought Naruto a betting stick with all the spare change she had in her ninja pouch, and the dubious man at the stand wrote her name in a book of some kind. She would have been an avid supporter of Naruto even if there had been no wager, but this allowed her to keep a cute little memento bearing Naruto's name. It took her an additional 30 minutes to navigate the stadium's stairs and corridors, making her way to the highest seats that were still available. The rail seats were extremely high up, too. After all, the stadium was constructed in this manner to ensure that the competitors could give it their all without inadvertently endangering the spectators. The crowds were already roaring as she approached the top of the stairway. Did she miss the beginning? Wasn't Naruto the first to fight? She was so relieved to see that the competitors had just stepped out of the entrance doors and were forming up in the middle of the arena. Her pearl-like eyes swiftly focused on Naruto's spiky blonde hair. A huge flood of amazing feelings filled her chest. It wasn't just her teammate or friend. Her boyfriend was that person. She tried to hide her reddening face with her hands and hide her bright smile, but she couldn't help but blush. In any case, nobody up here would recognize her, but... "Yo, Hinata," came from behind her in a voice she recognized. As she turned around, she saw Kakashi-sensei come out of the doors of the stairway. "Funny seeing you here. I was worried that I wouldn't make it in time to get a seat. I don't think I've ever seen a Chunin finals so crowded before." Behind him came another familiar voice. "That's because this is the first time everyone gets to see the Akatsuki ninjas in action," the voice said. In addition to Kakashi, a woman with dark, almost violet hair left. It nearly appeared as though, no, it was unquestionably the same woman who conducted the second exam section. "And 2 Uchiha, and 3 Jinchuriki, it's loaded." Hinata gave Kakashi-sensei a suspicious narrow of the eyes. Why, of all people, would he be watching the exams with Anko-sensei? Was it a date, or is it merely a coincidence? Before she could ask, Kakashi made the decision to say, "Come on, let's find a seat," even though it wasn't really her concern. Nevertheless, she felt compelled to avenge Kakashi for constantly making fun of her at her expense and making fun of Naruto. They eventually found one of the few empty rows by walking together. She was unable to resist fumbling nervously with the betting stick. She thought to herself, "Oh my goodness," and hurriedly tucked the stick into her pocket. "Please, Naruto-kun, be safe, don't get hurt, don't." What was she contemplating? If she was seen carrying a betting stick by Kakashi-sensei. Slowly, she turned to see that Kakashi had taken notice. She was horrified to see that her masked sensei, with only one eye and a portion of his face visible, was giving her the most sly look he could manage. Anko-sensei was laughing and shaking her head. With a light-hearted and sarcastic tone, Kakashi chose to ask her, "So did you bet on Sasuke too, or just Naruto?" He didn't appear angry, at least. "Oh no, hold on. She failed to place a wager on Sasuke-kun. She couldn't even recall." Kakashi shook his head and said, "Just Naruto, huh? Figures. How are things between you two? You know, as dense as Naruto is when it comes to romance, you're probably going to have to make the first move. There's nothing wrong with that, either." At last, she had the opportunity to be arrogant and make fun of sensei. Despite the butterflies in her stomach, she made the bold decision to say, "Oh, you haven't heard yet, Kakashi-sensei. Naruto's my boyfriend now, we're dating." Kakashi was so shocked that his eye widened. With a raised eyebrow, Anko even leaned forward and said, "Really? You and the blonde Uchiha? Nice. Congrats, kid." Hinata's smile was truly brilliant. "Thank you." Kakashi continued to observe with bewilderment and a seeming trace of horror. She tried not to laugh, but then she spoke again. "Maybe you could treat us out on a double date sometime, Kakashi-sensei." "Wait, you don't have a wife yet, do you? Or a girlfriend? Is that what you're trying to do now? Am I getting in the way?" Her sensei deserved it, even though she was being cruel. It was the least she could do after all the times he made fun of her liking Naruto. He at least laughed and scratched the back of his head nervously. Anko was also staring at him amusingly. Fortunately for him, the Jonin proctor down in the center stage had already taken a microphone and kicked off the event before he could respond. The proctor for the event, Genma Shiranui, said, "Ladies and gentlemen," in a loud voice that filled the stadium speakers. "We appreciate everyone who came to the event today and waited patiently for it to start. Please find your seats, it will start soon." Turning off the microphone, Genma turned to address the genin lining up behind him. Naruto appeared small enough to fit in the palm of her hand from all the way up here, so she chose to activate her Byakugan and push chakra into her eyes. Fortunately, she wasn't surrounded by any stiff Hyuga who might be upset with her for using their bloodline limit to get a better view of a sporting event, but it was still educational because she could see all of the genin competitors' chakra sources, and there were undoubtedly 3 Jinchuriki, whose chakra presence was more potent than anyone else's. Genma returned to the microphone after a few minutes of waiting, saying, "Ladies and gentlemen, once again, thank you for your patience. The annual Leaf Village Chunin exams for this year will now start." For another minute or so, the crowds erupted in cheers, with countless people enthusiastically waving their betting sticks in the air. With so many people, Hinata couldn't help but feel anxious for Naruto, wondering how he was handling the tremendous pressure. "Please rise for the arrival of the official party." Everyone got up right away and watched the cage's viewing platform with excitement. After a few moments, the Hokage, Amekage, and Kazekage, all dressed in their official attire, stepped out onto the platform along the rail. With the Hokage's voice echoing over the innumerable thousands in the stadium, "Everyone, please take your seats." Hinata sat down and brushed off her skirt, looking at Naruto once more. Now, all of the genin were standing calmly, gazing up at the platform. "What a lovely day, isn't it? I want to express my gratitude to the Amekage and Kazekage for being able to attend the event today. In the same way, I want to welcome and thank everyone present. We will soon be watching the genin in front of us compete against one another in hopes of being promoted to Chunin, as you are undoubtedly aware. I want to remind everyone that the judges in each village will decide whether or not to promote their ninja. The rounds will go on one after the other until there is a winner. Having said that, I hope everyone has a great time at the event today and during their visit to the Leaf Village. The ties that bind our countries together are essential to maintaining the current state of peace. In the hopes that we might finally find peace between us, let's dedicate this occasion to fortifying our ties even more." She didn't want either of them to get hurt, but she knew that Naruto was right. This was a fight to the death, and you couldn't hold back and expect not to get hurt, especially with an opponent like Neji. The crowd cheered again as the cage all sat down, and within a minute, all but 2 genin had left the arena floor, standing apart from each other with the proctor in the middle. "Naruto-kun, please, take caution. Naruto. Show them what you're made of, bro," Sasuke said with a smirk and a first bump as he passed him, and all of the non-competition genin went back to the waiting area. Naruto grinned back, not really trying to smile, and he had no idea what Naruto was made of anymore, but that wasn't his fault because he hadn't had much time in the previous month to sit down and discuss what he had gone through with his Uchiha brother. Naruto mentally reminded himself, "I need to talk to him after this. I need to keep our friendship intact before anything else can drive us further apart. You know, I figured you weren't as stupid as you pretended to be at the academy," Shikamaru said, his voice drawn on, slow and exhausted as usual, "but watching you fight in the prelims really confirmed it for me." Shikamaru stopped him in front of him, hands in his pockets, looking languidly up at the enormous stadium, which surprised him as he didn't really expect words of encouragement from anyone else. "Good luck, Naruto. Make us proud. After we're all Chunin, perhaps we can invite Iruka-sensei over for a barbecue or something." Seeing the 2 students in his class who almost failed out advance to the same rank as him in less than a year would probably make him laugh. He actually smiled and almost laughed at that thought, but Shikamaru left before he could reply. Shikamaru was a genius, a lazy genius, and by the time they graduated from the academy, both he and Naruto were far above the level of genin, but they had both almost failed, for different reasons, of course. From what he remembered, Shikamaru wasn't really trying to get the bare minimum, but he was genuinely so bored and lazy that he blinked and turned to see that Gaara of the desert had also paused to speak to him, saying, "Remember that. If you lose before you get to me, I'll kill you," the voice said, evil and cold. "And let me guess," smirking, Naruto said, "You're going to kill me if I win and make it to you." A month ago he would have been frozen and terrified at such a vicious killer intent pointed directly at him, but now he couldn't help but laugh as the red-haired Jinchuriki stopped and stared at him, the pure aura of murder surrounding him. Gaara's hatred and desire to kill was nothing compared to his own. "Yes, I can tell that it has been a while since you have felt fear, Gaara," Naruto said, turning to face Gaara as he walked away to where Genma was waving him over after laughing. "Haven't you always been the hunter? Do not be concerned, I'll assist you in remembering." Naruto paused as all the other dismissed genin went by him, looking up at the innumerable thousands of spectators and supporters in the stadium seats above him. A tremendous wave of nostalgia struck him, leaving him motionless and perplexed. Why would he feel nostalgic for an event like this? He had never been to anything like. Oh, he remembered now. He had spent all those years watching the Chunin exams with Shisui, and he had promised his older brother that he would be down in the arena one day, that he would win the entire thing and bring honor to the Uchiha clan. No matter how hard he looked, no matter where he looked, he would not find Shisui in the crowd, encouraging him, and he would not find the Uchiha clan there to support him and Sasuke. They were all dead now. He laughed darkly, anger and sadness creating a miserable mix inside his heart. Genma began to explain the tournament rules to him, but Naruto was unable to hear a word. Neji Hyuga, who was standing a few yards ahead of him, was the only thing that remained. This village had taken everything from him, including his mother and father, as well as the clan that adopted him. When he had almost nothing left, Neji had attempted to take Hinata away as well. He didn't care about Neji's justification or whether Neji was justified, and after this fight, Neji would never threaten her again. Is there anything I should repeat for you? Genma asked, snapping Naruto from his dream-like state. He shook his head. You sure? Okay, then, I wish you both luck. Are you ready? Let's start the day's first battle, which pits Naruto Uchiha against Neji Hyuga. Despite his confidence, Naruto couldn't help but feel a healthy dose of nervous excitement in his blood, so instead of jumping back, he started to walk forward towards Neji. It wasn't like Neji had any long-distance attacks anyway, and he had nothing to run away from, so the crowd erupted in thunderous cheering as both Neji and Genma leapt back from the center of the arena. He pushed chakra into his eyes to activate his Sharingan as he moved forward, and it helped to calm his nerves. He could still feel his evil chakra circulating through his system and up to his eyes, pleading with him to unleash it. To his surprise, Naruto found a surprising amount of revulsion in the young Hyuga's blank irises. Good, that would make this all the better. His eyes met Neji's sheer white Byakugan for the first time since entering the arena. Neji must have been sure he could see through any genjutsu Naruto tried to place because he didn't hesitate to lock eyes. Neji yelled at him, barely audible over the din of the crowds, I've been looking forward to this moment every day since you're finally going to pay for what you did to me. As he proceeded forward, he raised one hand in a half-seal, and a shadow clone materialized in the air above Neji, flipping forward with amazing speed, just a shimmer. Bam! After the clone's foot made contact, Neji's face was slammed downward, but he managed to stay upright, and before he could look up in surprise, a dozen clones had gathered around him, all of them racing toward him with their kunai outstretched. Swivel! Neji spun inhumanly fast just before he was impaled, pushing so much chakra around him that Naruto had to squint from a distance. Neji's chakra created a force field of air that pushed away all of the attacking clones like leaves in a storm, sending them flying and dispersing. By the time he stopped spinning, Neji had made a small crater in the ground around himself. Are you preventing me from completing my thoughts? Neji called out mockingly, falling into an advanced form of gentle fist that he knew was a form preparing to attack. A line of blood was trickling down from his mouth. He must have bit his tongue. No matter. The outcome will remain the same. Today, fate is not on your side. Naruto crossed his arms and shrugged, saying, this is not a drama show. This is a death match. Neji's ability to use it as a genin told him that Neji was nothing less than a prodigy, despite being in the branch family. Nevertheless, that rotation was extremely impressive. Having trained with Hinata-chan, he knew that it was a particularly advanced technique only taught to the higher-level Hyuga in the main branch who have mastered their chakra control to an absurd level. He wondered how the main family felt about that. I can do that, Neji said with a sly smile. Then let me use my fists to express how I feel. Anyone else would have jumped back from an approaching Hyuga, but since the Hyuga are famous for being masters of the best taijutsu in the ninja world, it was common practice for everyone to attack a Hyuga from a distance. Naruto settled into his own relaxed fighting stance as Neji darted towards him, rapidly closing the distance. The Uchiha, on the other hand, had a clear advantage over the Hyuga with the Sharingan. They were able to read and predict movements, which allowed them to avoid being hit and having their chakra points blocked. Perhaps most importantly, depending on the level of the Sharingan wielder, a skilled Uchiha could actually copy and imitate the gentle fist style. Because of this, the Uchiha were always able to get a slight advantage over the Hyuga since their clans had formed, and the Hyuga avoided conflict at all costs. In addition to sparring against the Gentle Fist almost daily with Hinata, Naruto had every advantage in this battle because he had seen Neji's battle against her in the preliminary round and his eyes had already followed Neji's movements, so he knew what moves were coming without even having to consider them. He saw the increasing annoyance on Neji's face as he danced around various forms of Gentle Fist. Blocking with chakra when dodging was impossible, and he continued to weave and dodge as Neji's fingers sought out his vital chakra points, treating his opponent's hands as if they were kunai. Neji's first strike passed his head without an inch to spare. There was not a single mistake or miscalculated blow in Neji's form, and he knew better than to try to attack when he thought there was an opening. Every opening he saw was a planned trap set by Neji, who was trying to lure Naruto to throw out a limb only to close its chakra points. Naruto's red eyes snapped around at unnatural speeds to follow every move, and even Hinata-chan, with her talent, had never come close to this level of expert ferocity. He realized immediately after witnessing Neji's rotation that he would not be able to just leap away and attempt to use ninjutsu from a distance. Instead, he would need to complete this confrontation directly. He only needed Neji to make one mistake, one slip up, and he would have the opportunity to use his substitution technique to devastating effect. As Neji kept swerving and avoiding blows, Naruto baited him with, "I can read your every move," and he had to stop in the middle of his challenges because Neji would not give up. "Every time you miss, I can read your movements, easier than before." Perfect. Naruto had blocked the last attack with chakra in his hands, so he knew that Neji would try to overwhelm him this time with a much stronger finishing blow. Neji snarled and pushed extra chakra into his hands, falling back into one of the forms he had used earlier. The Hyuga leapt forward without wasting breath, and with the penultimate move, he struck through Naruto's guard hard enough to make him stumble. He connected his chakra to a prepared kunai and threw it at Neji as he leapt back. Neji did a minor version of rotation, as he had hoped, deflecting the kunai and sending it skyward. Right now, just before Neji ran forward and punched a hand through his neck, he stumbled backwards and activated the substitution. Neji's lightning-fast killing blow caused the crowd to gasp, but instead of blood gushing from Naruto's neck, he dissolved into a cloud of smoke and then exploded. Boom! He switched places with his kunai, which he had wrapped an explosive tag around, and Naruto flew through the air, seeing the flash of spinning chakra through the smoke and fire. Neji had used rotation once more, and this time at such close quarters, so it would be a little more difficult than he had anticipated. While the majority of the audience consisted of civilians, who found the entire event to be surreal and magical, the trained ninja watched with admiration as both opponents narrowly avoided death, and the crowd cheered when Neji emerged from the cloud unharmed. It was time to resume the offensive. He flew through a series of shorthand seals before landing on the open palm wind seal. "Air bullet, wind style," he yelled in his mind as he brought his hands to his mouth and took in as much air as he could. He then quickly spat out multiple compressed balls of air the size of his head at Neji, funneling the freshly created wind chakra to his mouth. He landed with a thud, and when he looked up, he saw that Neji had already started spinning, and the balls of air hitting the ground around him exploded in huge bursts of wind, while the ones that reached him were instantly deflected and sent in all directions. One of them shot upwards to a section of the crowd, and he froze. Did they set up some kind of defense? He exhaled in relief. It was probably his fault for not listening to Genma, who probably explained this beforehand anyhow, but the ball appeared to strike some invisible force field in front of the audience before it could do any damage. "Don't you get dizzy spinning around all the time?" he asked, quickly returning his gaze to Neji, who stopped spinning and assumed a new stance. While he was considering his next move, he called out to his opponent. Neji said sarcastically, "You can't get dizzy if you can see in 360 degrees, as though it were the most obvious thing in the world." He had never considered it that way. Therefore, he was unable to attack Neji directly. Even if his eyes could keep up, Neji's gentle fist would destroy any of his taijutsu. Rotation would negate any ninjutsu attacks from a distance, and genjutsu was obviously out of the question because the Byakugan could see through it. He reached into his pouch and took out a kunai, saying, if he was going to be up close and personal with a gentle fist master, he might as well bring a blade. In reality, he would have preferred a longer katana or even a staff, but he hadn't trained properly with one and he might end up just hurting himself. This would be an attrition battle then, and Naruto had the overwhelming advantage due to his massive chakra reserves. Holding up a half seal with his other hand, he called forth two shadow clones to charge forward with their own kunai drawn. If he had enough chakra, he could do this, and they would either defeat Neji or he would learn from their mistakes. One of the clones leapt high into the air and flipped behind Neji, knowing that it wouldn't do much because his opponent could see in all directions, but even if Neji could see behind himself, he couldn't punch behind himself. The clones charged forward at Neji, who went into defensive stance. He's not just using rotation like he did before. It must take a lot of his chakra then. I'll just have to force him to use it until he can't, then. Neji told Naruto as he skillfully dodged the two clones' simultaneous attacks while he watched from a distance. Naruto flew through the same hand seals as before, even before Neji vanquished his assailants. Wind style. Air bullet. He yelled in his head, forcing chakra from his lips and launching two massive balls of compressed air in Neji's direction. Swivel. The shadow clones scattered. The balls of wind exploded on contact this time, sending the air exploding all over the arena, and Naruto protected his face from the powerful winds while absorbing the memory of his clones. Needless to say, just before the group was shot, Neji spun around once more, creating a huge shield of spinning chakra around him. This time, he raised the cross seal and surrounded Neji, who had just stopped, with about a dozen shadow clones. Naruto could see that he was now breathing heavily, and it was just a matter of time until. Using a chakra-assisted boost, Neji leapt forward and suddenly materialized in front of Naruto. I won't allow you to continue fleeing while your clones battle, idiot. As Naruto pulled his hand back to strike, he yelled at him. This was almost too simple, and just before Neji's blow hit him, he smirked and replaced himself with a shadow clone, which was the simplest and quickest method of substitution because his clones were the same size as him and were completely composed of his chakra. Naruto activated the exploding tags in his clone's pocket from a safe distance just as Neji punched through his clone, and Neji must have seen the switch immediately after it occurred because he was able to turn slightly before the explosion went off. Boom. Neji was actually flung up into the air by the explosion, but it appeared that he had blocked most of the damage with chakra. Naruto's red eyes saw the familiar sphere of protective chakra appear around him once more, but he must not have been fast enough. Damn, he was seriously fast. Naruto pondered how he was seated in the tournament and whether or not anyone up there really bet on him winning this match. If he wasn't already so rich, he would have put his own money down beforehand. The crowd cheered after the explosion and even louder when Neji flipped in the air and landed on the ground, apparently unharmed. As Neji was kneeling and catching his breath, his dark eyes met his opponent's. Neji, I can do this all day. With deliberate boastfulness in his voice, he called out to him across the arena, what, you're already perspiring. When Hinata-chan fought you, she must have been holding back. He made sure to put his arms behind his head and turn sideways to let the audience know that he was making fun of Neji because they couldn't hear anything he was shouting out from so far away. Cheers broke out again right away, and if he concentrated, he could also hear laughter. Good, at least they were getting a show. This was merely a show. Naruto could have used his Mangekyo to end the battle the moment it began, but he also learned from his limited experience that using the Mangekyo required a lot of chakra, which was evident. But he also learned that the more chakra an opponent had, the more resistance they could muster, especially if they were like Neji, who would sense the genjutsu. If Neji was exhausted and almost completely depleted of chakra, Naruto could use the Mangekyo with less resistance, and he undoubtedly had plans to use the Mangekyo. Without wasting any time in retaliation, Neji snarled and charged forward once more. Naruto, anticipating this, unleashed another hand seal, causing a dozen clones to shimmer silently around him. He laughed as Neji hesitated, no longer willing to attack the clones mindlessly, knowing that they could now explode. What's wrong? You can tell which ones are clones, right? One of the clones called out to Neji. Why don't you launch an attack? He was pleasantly surprised when a few of the clones managed to get glancing blows in, and one even managed to get a small cut into Neji's leg, though that one had been quickly dispersed. The clones all charged in, alternating between attacking in teams and attacking simultaneously. And when the last few clones all dove toward Neji simultaneously, the Hyuga formed a familiar stance and started to spin. Swivel, now, Naruto thought with a smirk, pushing a large amount of chakra into creating two other shadow clones across the arena. They all quickly formed the palm seal while Neji was still spinning, and before he had time to stop, shouted out, wind style, air bullets. Neji was hit by a series of compressed balls of wind, all of which exploded harmlessly when they hit him, but they didn't stop. Naruto and his clones rotated between the three, shooting low-powered balls of air at the rotating Hyuga until Neji would have to stop spinning. He might not be experiencing vertigo, but if Naruto's Sharingan was correct, he was currently expelling chakra from almost every part of his body, which could produce an amazing shield very quickly, but it was impossible for Neji to sustain it for long. The bullets might not be powerful enough to kill on first contact, but the second Neji's shield fell, he would undoubtedly be struck. Seconds passed slowly as Naruto and his clones continued their wind-style attacks. Naruto's guess was correct. The shield appeared to flicker and falter for a brief moment before he swiftly stepped up the intensity of his attacks. As expected, Neji stopped spinning and attempted to jump away immediately after one wind explosion, but he was only just able to get off the ground before the next wind bullet exploded next to him, sending him hurtling into the air. The audience cheered again as Neji painfully rolled across the arena floor, but this time he was unable to flip correctly and land on his feet, and he was able to catch his feet and avoid slamming into one of the walls. He could see the annoyance on Neji's face even from a distance, and unless Neji had some new tricks, it was clear now how this match was going to end. Naruto went on the attack, not even letting Neji get to his feet before he charged forward with a chakra-boosted leap, making clones all around him at the same time. He wasn't foolish enough to take on Neji directly, though, as long as he had enough chakra to make clones, he could wear Neji out with minimal danger to himself. Neji was standing when all of the charging clones threw their kunai at once. To his surprise, instead of spinning or deflecting, Neji somehow managed to jump high into the air to avoid them, flipping high and far enough to land against the arena wall while using chakra to stay to the side. When Naruto's clones jumped in pursuit, Neji threw his own kunai down at them. The Hyuga made eye contact with the real Naruto, who was still standing alone on the arena floor, but knew better than to just try to attack him. Now that Neji knew he could switch with his clones in an instant, it didn't fully matter which Naruto was the real one, they all could land punches. One clone was hit, but the others landed around him on the wall with more kunai drawn. With a furious scream, Neji charged at the clones that surrounded him, and even though they had their blades out, Neji was able to deftly dodge the swipes and strike back, but even as he scattered clone after clone, the cuts and nicks that appeared on his body kept getting bigger. He punched through the last clone and leapt off the wall, landing a few feet in front of Naruto. At one point, his usual ponytail had fallen loose, and his naturally long hair cascaded across his face. As he approached Neji, his mind immediately recognized every move his opponent would make. He knew where Neji would strike first, and he knew where he was going to strike back. Naruto had absorbed enough memories from his clones by this point to charge forward himself. His Sharingan had been observing every little detail from a distance, and his clones' Sharingans had been doing the same as they fought. The gentle fist, or at least Neji's version of it, depended solely on jabs and strikes. Their feet always remained grounded, always shifting throughout forms but never leaving the ground. Neji had to jump to avoid being knocked off his feet. He made a number of shadow clones around himself just in case, but charged forward with the calm determination to end the battle. Neji struck out like a snake the moment Naruto was within reach. Naruto slid down on the ground at the last second, using his momentum to execute a sliding kick. Neji had no way of moving in time, so he tried to cover downwards with his arms, but it was ineffective. Naruto's foot struck hard enough that he was almost certain he heard a bone snap in Neji's forearm. He used chakra to stop his momentum and pushed off the ground with his hands, flying upwards after Neji, his feet leading the way. He kicked once more, this time at Neji's head, and the powerful blow struck, sending Neji's headband flying and making him instinctively cover his head with his arms. Naruto used a final chakra push to kick as hard as he could at his bare chest. Break. Naruto flipped back down to the ground and looked up just in time to see his clones intercept Neji midair with their own volley of punches and kicks, sending him back to the ground as his exposed chest cracked under the full force of his kick, sending him flying away into the air. Slam. The crowd's cheers were a far-off roar as his crimson eyes narrowed down on his opponent, and he stalked forward, going in for the finishing blow. It was time for blood, it was time for revenge, and he wasn't going to let Neji off with just a. Neji was smashed hard into the ground, and the smoke that rose around his body was dust and dirt flying up into the air, not his clones dispersing. Break. A water whip slashed out of the smoke and struck out where he had been moments before, and Naruto blinked in surprise as the water flew past his head with enough force to have cut right through him. Water. Ninjutsu. From Neji. His eyes saw movement, and he snapped his body to the side without a second's warning. Since the Hyuga were a proud group and believed that Gentle Fist and their sacred arts were more than enough to defeat any opponent, it must have been extremely painful for him to abandon his pure gentle fist and turn to ninjutsu, which would likely be punishable within his clan. He pushed forward and hopped to the side as Neji leapt out of the smoke with an angry yell, throwing forward another whip of water at him. Seeing Naruto this close, he dropped his hand seals and tried to return to stance, but he was too exhausted, too slow, and too late. He wasn't going to give Neji another chance to turn the fight around, so he dodged a few more slicing jets of water, spun, and weaved forward, appearing before Neji in an instant, blood streaming down his angry opponent's bare forehead. With little knowledge of which chakra points needed to be closed, Naruto skillfully drew two kunai and stabbed them forward into Neji's shoulders, sinking them deep as Neji roared in pain. Naruto knew that Neji would not be moving his arms anytime soon. Naruto grinned as his crimson eyes, which were only a foot or so apart, met Neji's, filled with cruelty and hatred. Wind style. Neji was knocked away as if struck by a charging horse, wind blasting out of Naruto's hands and sending him tumbling back to the center of the arena as he clapped his palms together and slammed his hands into him before pushing outwards with an explosion of his chakra. When the crowd erupted in cheers and cries, Naruto completely ignored them and continued to walk forward, his eyes fixed on his opponent, Neji motionless in the middle. The familiar embers of hatred had rekindled inside his heart, and he could feel the fire inside growing, pleading to spread. He could feel the sinister hatred seeping up into his eyes and into his mind. The Mangekyo was only a breath away, and the words of destruction sat on his lips, begging to be spoken. He could burn them all, couldn't he? Yes, he most definitely could. His heart was pleading for it. They all deserved it, after the years of suffering they had caused him. It took all his strength to resist and direct his resentment back toward Neji. He had a mission, after all. He looked up at the crowd as he walked forward to claim his prize. He paused when he was within speaking range and looked down at his opponent, Neji, who was still conscious, covered in his own blood, and struggling to stand up. For the first time since the fight began, Naruto saw Gemna, who had also approached Neji, and his hand twitched as if he was deciding whether or not to end the fight. Naruto had none of it. Stand aside, he ordered, causing Genma to stare at him bewildered as he allowed his evil chakra to rise into his eyes. What? It's not up to, Genma said, but his words were cut short when his eyes met Naruto's, which widened in terror. Without any discussion, he pushed his will and chakra into Genma, then backed off and let Naruto move forward with a gulp and a silent nod. Neji heard him approaching and slowly raised his bloodied head to glare at Naruto as he got closer. "You, bastard," was all he could manage to grunt, with some blood trickling from his mouth. It was a harsh order, but Naruto was enjoying every second of it. "Stand," he said with a savage smile, thrusting his chakra into Neji's eyes, the same thing Neji had said to Hinata during their battle. As his body began to move against his will, Neji gasped in shock and pain. His hands and legs moved and pushed him upright, even though the kunai was still firmly embedded in his shoulders. Slowly, he shook and wheezed before he finally stood up, eye level with Naruto. His eyes were filled with confusion and hatred, but as they finally focused in on Naruto's crimson eyes, they were filled with something that Naruto longed for. Fear. How did you? Neji choked out, unable to look away as his eyes met Naruto's Mangekyou's. What are you? You were right at the beginning, Neji, he said, relishing in the newfound hesitancy and fear emanating from Neji. This was always the outcome. You were correct about fate, too. I've never had luck on my side. Throughout my battle against fate, I have evolved into a much more formidable monster than I was at birth. You may have had more talent from birth, but I've learned to hate you much more. You're upset about the death of your father. Get tough, jerk. It didn't take Koto Amatsukami to realize that Neji wanted to kill Naruto and Hinata. He didn't care about himself, but he needed to make sure that he protected his friend at all costs. Neji appeared to want to bite his face off, but Naruto wasn't in the mood to even let him respond. After all, he had a reason for using the Mangekyo now. Pushing more chakra into Neji, he ordered, "You are never allowed to harm Hinata." He could handle Neji's animosity toward the Hyuga without involving Hinata-chan. Forgive her instead. He was shocked to hear Neji laugh at him. Hey, I may have lost to you today. But take note of what I say. I'll get stronger. I will exact my revenge on you, my clan, and Hinata. I promise. The command didn't stick, and Naruto narrowed his eyes in frustration. He thought it would be more difficult than that, especially if Neji's life had been devoted to retaliation. However, It was impressive that he was able to resist his command at this point, considering that he was almost completely out of chakra. How did he manage to? He squinted as he noticed an odd X etched on Neji's bloodied forehead, pulsing faintly with chakra. Was that related to it? In any case, he had no time to waste contemplating it. He would have to delve deep into Neji's mind. Naruto grunted, gathering more of his spiritual chakra and pouring it into Neji's eyes. "We'll see about that," he said. Koto Amatsukami. The mind of Neji. However, the biggest and most obvious difference from his previous experience was not just the color of the chakra itself. As Naruto floated forward, he noticed a giant obstruction in his way, preventing him from approaching Neji's mind. Naruto opened his eyes inside the realm of Neji's mind, which was much darker than he remembered Gaara's being and, instead of being green, had a massive blue orb of chakra floating at its center, with the entire area glowing a gentle blue. "What is this?" he asked himself in a low voice as he floated up to the blue chakra, feeling as though a force field was obstructing his path. He reached out to try to push through with a small amount of chakra, but the instant he did. Whoa! When he looked back at the orb, he saw black lines that appeared suddenly and then faded away, encircling the brain in strange patterns like a constricting snake. The black lines seemed to grow and stretch across the orb until they met in front like a giant X. He was immediately pushed backwards as energy pulsed from around the orb. He was not going to give up now. He had already expended enough of his spiritual chakra on Neji. He floated upwards until he was right in front of the strange seal, then he pushed his chakra ahead of him, only to have it dispersed as he approached the seal, almost throwing him back. Damn it all! What kind of seal was this? Was it the curse seal, used by the Hyuga to subjugate the branch family, and why was he unable to avoid it? His rage and impatience grew as he was reminded of the evil power he possessed. He tapped into the Mangeku's chakra further, separating it from what he was currently using with Koto Amatsukami. It was strange that he was able to do that so naturally. The chakra he used to enter Neji's mind was somehow distinct from the other chakra mixed within, Amaterasu. While one felt like a raging inferno, the other seemed like a dimmer and lower source of burning embers, and it was easy to determine which was which. He would have to be careful to control the fire and ensure that it didn't burn all of Neji's mind. However, he assured Hinata-chan that he couldn't simply murder Neji. He concentrated his thoughts and chakra on the seal before him and summoned the black fire inside of him. Like all fires, his chakra wanted to devour everything, and he could sense that it wanted more than just to burn the seal. It wanted all of the chakra in front of him, as well as all of the chakra in Naruto's heart. Naruto had to work very hard to keep his attention on the seal and not let it all run wild. As he locked his iron gaze on the seal, he whispered, "Amaterasu," and almost immediately a black fire ignited in the center of the X. Naruto could tell that the fire was disappointed with his limitations, but it was happy to burn away anyhow. He would have to have a serious conversation with Madara about this later on and talk about why he was able to distinguish feelings from his jutsu at all. The black lines that had so easily repelled him moments before burned away as if they were made of dry tissue paper, dissolving in an instant, and the fire quickly spread over the whole snaking seal, until the next time he blinked, the black fire had been extinguished and the seal had vanished. Before he could proceed, another seal flashed out with a dazzling light, taking its place. "Are you serious? What the fuck? No wonder he's so pissed off all the time," he moaned, shielding his eyes and squinting to try to look forward. How many seals is this guy thinking about? When he approached the seal, Naruto flinched in anticipation, but to his utter amazement, he was able to float through it and reach out to Neji's mind directly through it. This seal, in contrast to the previous black one, glowed with a bright, white light, with warm rays now filling the entire realm with a pleasant glow. Thank God, I was starting to wonder if... Get going. Why did it have to be like this? Why did they have to suffer such a cruel fate, without any chance of ever fighting back? Naruto watched in horror as Hiashi flashed a hand seal that caused his father to fall to the ground in a cry of pain. His heart broke in half as he watched his father suffer. If their cursed seal could even be removed, it had never happened before in the Hyuga's history. Get going. To his horror, Hiashi refused to back down and, with a ferocious yell, activated the cursed seal once more, slowly killing his father in front of the clan. No, no, please, no. No way. Even though he had only unintentionally been in a memory for a few seconds, Naruto's heart was already heavy with Neji's suffering. I don't want to relive Neji's most tragic memories. Not now, not ever. I have enough of my own misery to deal with, he yelled as he distanced himself from the memory, preventing any more from trying to flood his brain. He was not here for that. Pushing Neji's grief from his heart, he reached down into his own hatred, pulling as much chakra as he could to set his command permanently. When he felt he had drawn as much as he could, he opened his eyes and cautiously extended his hand once more. He said out loud, "Forgive Hinata," and he pushed his chakra onto Neji's mind, causing a pool of his will and chakra to swirl before him before it swiftly dispersed and vanished into thin air. Really, the command wouldn't set even now. Was he not yet strong enough to carry this out? Could he make this work if he changed the command to be less strenuous for Neji? He remembered a piece of advice Madara had given him in the past, but he couldn't remember exactly what it was. He remembered Madara telling him that it would be easier to persuade someone to do something they already wanted to do, than to do something they vehemently refused to do. His chakra was already flowing out of his body and covering Neji's mind, and all he could manage to say was, "Don't harm Hinata." He wanted to say more, but he was running out of patience and chakra, and he was afraid it wouldn't stick again. He could now feel the hatred that was inside Neji's mind, a murderous hatred, and he knew what that hatred would lead him to do. He didn't have the strength to completely erase that hatred at this time, but he could just barely divert it away from Hinata-chan. Holding his breath, he watched in amazement as his chakra formed an unreadable seal in front of him and embedded itself onto Neji's mind, glowing for a moment or two but not fading. Yes, it did work. It set. Neji had no idea what it was, but as long as his own command seal had set, his mission was successful, and the strange giant seal that had appeared before he had set his own continued to glow a bright white color, so much so that the rest of his bluish mind started to change into a different, lighter color as well. "The arena. I'm not asking you. Naruto said in a strained voice as he blinked his eyes once more in reality. "Don't harm Hinata." When he noticed Neji's Byakugan pulse glowing white, he trailed off and stopped. A few seconds later, the light vanished, as did the veins along his temples, and his pale, pupilless eyes slowly but surely rolled up and back to his head before collapsing. With one last thud, Neji struck the ground. It was unlike anything Naruto had ever experienced in his life, and when the crowd erupted in cheers louder than ever before, he was finally brought back to reality. The entire village was cheering for his victory, and he was the center of attention, but he was so exhausted that he didn't even bother to wave or smile at them, instead turning his head back down to look at Neji. Of course it was related to the weird seal that had materialized inside Neji's head, but what exactly had that white light been? As he was about to turn around and head back to the waiting area, he stepped on something hard and looked down to see that it was Neji's headband, which he had kicked off earlier, after Genma formally declared him the winner to the stadium. As sweet as it felt, he had already exacted his revenge and had no more rage left for his Hyuga opponent, who was currently lying bloody and broken on the ground in front of him with a medical team racing out to the scene. He sighed and stooped to pick it up, then turned around to throw it back to Neji. He shook his head and threw the headband back down at Neji. The X was no longer on his forehead, and he had to take a second look at Neji because something about him seemed strange. He turned around quickly before the medical team shoved him aside, and he began to stomp back to the exit, feeling uneasy about the disappearance of that X, and the consequences of breaking the seal on Neji's mind, but that could wait. The more urgent situation was whether he would have to face Masahiro of Akatsuki or Gaara of the Desert in the next round. The Uchiha compound. For almost an hour, the two hooded men sat side by side, gazing up at the enormous tablet before them, while the smaller one reached up to pull back his cover and take off his black mask, his bright blonde hair standing out against the rest of his dark garments. "Is that all?" With his voice echoing eerily down the dark hallway behind him, Saito asked in the empty room without turning to face his partner, "I'll need the Rinnegan to read any further." "And what about the blindness part?" "Alone you cannot stop the blinding hatred," Toby read out loud in a gloomy tone. "You must seek the equal vision of another, one close enough to be considered your brother." "It's not a simple metaphor, trust me," he said with a dark laugh as he stepped forward and approached the tablet. "Eventually, anyone who uses the Mangekyo Sharingan will lose their vision and become blind with hatred. That's the price of being so powerful. But seek the equal vision of another," Saito replied, reading the passage again, "so you can somehow avoid it." With his face still concealed by his orange mask and dark hood, Toby nodded solemnly. The eternal Mangekyo Sharingan. In a sense, Madara figured out the answer to this riddle a long time ago. You must take your fellow brother the Uchiha's Sharingan and implant it in yourself to restore your vision and prevent blindness. Your vision will last longer the closer that person is to you. What? Saito questioned bewilderedly, finding the notion disgusting. So you have to steal someone else's eyes. And it won't last forever even then. Darkly dejected, Toby crossed his arms and turned back to his disciple, saying, there is only one, eternal, Mangekyo, the Rinnegan. Madara found out. You will eventually become blind until you have the Senju bloodline in you. And you will eventually lose your mind, even if you change your eyes 100 times. The more you use the Mangekyo, the more it will corrupt your mind. Reaching up, Saito replaced his dark mask and pulled the hood over his own head. How about Naruto and me? We have Shisui's eyes already. Toby tilted his head and gazed down at his pupil, saying, have you not heard me? In reality, the eternal Mangekyo does not exist. Your chances of becoming blind and insane increase with the amount of time you spend using your abilities. Madara used to deceive people into believing that the eternal Mangekyo could save them from their impending doom. But that's all it is, a lie that drove a lot of people insane. Users of Mangekyo are powerless to change their destiny. Apart from Naruto, of course. The Nine Tails. Yep, Toby said, that demon uses its physical chakra to give its Jinchuriki amazing healing abilities. Even if Naruto employs more and more Mangekyo techniques, that chakra will continue to heal his eyes. But if you consider it, that might be a blessing in disguise. If you were aware that you weren't gradually losing your sight, you would be much more likely to abuse the Mangekyo and risk rapidly losing your mind. It has addictive power. In any event, I'm not worried about it because I'm sure Madara has a plan for Naruto. With his arms crossed in frustration, Saito said, so I'm gradually losing my vision, huh? Unless I manage to acquire the Senju bloodline, isn't that right? All right, but even that is a matter of fate. Either you have that bloodline from birth or you don't. Despite his clever genius, Madara was unable to figure out how to properly copy and steal the Senju bloodline into himself. I don't think anyone ever will. A tiny, empty, dark portal the size of a fist materialized in the center of Saito's fingers when he snapped them. Come on, Toby-sensei. We should probably start talking about the true reason we returned to the village in the first place. As was prone to happen at random, Toba's voice briefly became a little lighter and more casual. Oh man, I'm excited. I've devoted a significant portion of my life to uncovering long-forgotten mysteries, and I find it astounding that one was concealed in my own village for so long. Shall we go find a scroll for ourselves? And the two of them were immediately drawn into the portal with only a whirl of the wind. Viewers. The thousands of people surrounding her were still cheering, and Hinata straightened herself uneasily as she watched Naruto leave the arena floor. She couldn't bring herself to clap in joy or excitement, even though she knew that no one in the entire stadium wanted Naruto to win more than she did. She was definitely relieved, thrilled that nobody had been gravely injured, and proud that Naruto had triumphed and demonstrated his skill to the entire village. She didn't clap, though, by saying, every time I think I'm starting to figure that guy out, loud enough for her to hear him over the crowd, Kakashi finally jolted her out of her reverie. That fight was about as confusing to me as Naruto is, he said. Using water style, Neji. What did Naruto ultimately do to him? As she watched the match with her Byakugan activated, she had a fairly good idea of what had happened at the end, and the pit in her stomach only confirmed it. Naruto had activated the Mangekyo and used it on Neji, so she was relieved that the question was left open-ended. The Sharingan couldn't see chakra from this distance, so he probably didn't know what had happened, but as Naruto had approached Neji, she knew that there was a great chance that her former clansman was going to die. She had first screamed out in fear when she saw the chakra inside Naruto change from a light blue to a sinister black. Despite biting her tongue to hide herself, Kakashi had undoubtedly noticed. However, Naruto's chakra had turned into a black fire. Unlike the normal soft glow of chakra flowing through a ninja's chakra points, the Mangekyo's chakra had slowly spread through his body and his brain like a fire. Each ninja had a different hue of chakra, which is normally never visible to the human eye. To the best of her knowledge, all the colors she had ever seen in people were light-hued. As she watched the black chakra enter Neji, all the color had gone out of her face, and she was afraid that Neji himself would either die or explode in flames at any moment. In hindsight, what transpired was likely far worse than either. The Hyuga's curse seal inside Neji's brain had been burned away by the black chakra. She had witnessed the flash, and the entire Hyuga clan was undoubtedly watching in the same manner as her. Naruto had killed Neji. As a last resort, The seal will release and destroy the unfortunate branch member's mind and eyes before their bloodline can be taken, but normally it would block anyone attempting to enter a Hyuga's mind or steal their bloodline limit. However, as the seal was destroyed and Neji collapsed to the ground, she noticed that his body was still pulsing with a new chakra that was distinct from the color she had just seen in him. More significantly, though, the fact that the seal was no longer on his forehead proved that she was not seeing things. Neji was still alive and the seal had vanished. Every member of the main and branch families had just witnessed someone remove the removable cursed seal from Neji, and now they were all watching in horror as Neji was taken out of the arena on a stretcher, hurt but still very much alive. Did Naruto even know what he did? Did he understand what that meant? She glanced at the Hyuga clan's seats elsewhere in the stadium, where they stood out as the only sizable group not cheering, clapping, and jumping like the rest of the crowd. Their faces were horrified, and not a single member dared to move. "Hinata, what's wrong?" She snapped out of her reverie once more when Kakashi poked her in the ribs and said, "You don't seem that happy that your new boyfriend came out victorious." She deactivated her Byakugan, sank back into her seat with a weary sigh, and shook her head in an attempt to clear her mind. She ended up muttering, "It's complicated," before he could question her again, her mind racing with all the possible outcomes. Would they try to kill Naruto for this? They couldn't. Naruto was the village Jinchuriki, and he. Are these chairs available? The Hyuga clan now knew that there was a way to remove the cursed seal from someone without killing them, and they knew that there was someone with the power to do it. She hardly even heard the words of someone speaking behind her. She needed to talk to Naruto. He needed to. All right, you little bitch, I was going to sit here anyhow." She was in the perfect mood to vent her mounting annoyance on someone, but she bit her tongue just in time to see who it was. She turned in morbid shock as a very rude man slammed down in the open seat next to her with no regard for anything, pushing her elbows off the seat rest and spreading out his legs. Thankfully, there was no sign of the enormous size she remembered him carrying, and the white-haired Akatsuki Jonin said, "Gurren, sit your ass down already," adding, "These are probably the last seats in this entire shithole anyway, and I'm not walking around anymore." Great. The Akatsuki ninja, who exuded death and nightmares with every breath, was now elbowing her, as though the world was now attempting to kill her with stress alone. Wasn't it going to be a long day? The platform of cage. As the two competitors exited the arena, or, in Neji's case, were carried out on a stretcher, the cheers from the crowd below finally subsided and turned into the typical rumble of excited conversation. "I thought that performance was pretty good." The cage turned and congratulated the Hokage, his face showing a genuine smile beneath his traditional hat. The Leaf Village's leader was sitting in the middle of the other two cage. Efficient and confident, that blonde Uchiha. It's unfortunate that two formidable opponents faced off in the opening round. It will reduce your chances of reaching the championship match, Lord Hokage. The Hokage's face was unreadable except for his typical serene smile. "Oh, Lord Kazekage, I'm not really that worried. I would not be shocked if Naruto Uchiha won the entire tournament given his recent performance." Seated to the left of the Hokage, the Amekage turned to look at him knowingly. The two of them were aware of Naruto's new power, and the Amekage was the only one who truly understood its magnitude. The Amekage, who had been largely silent since they arrived at the viewing platform, said, "You seem quite confident in your ninja, Lord Hokage," but he couldn't help but think that the Akatsuki would win today's tournament. The next two competitors, Masahiro of the Red Sand and Gaara of the Desert, had just entered the arena when the crowd burst into cheers once more, prompting the three village leaders to turn and look at what was making the noise. "Well, Lord Amekage, are you really certain about that?" The Kazekage crossed his arms and smirked as he jokingly remarked, "It appears that my son will be the next to engage in combat. Oh, and notice who he is battling. It's a nice coincidence." The Hokage chose to ask the obvious question after squinting his eyes down at the two individuals on the arena and consulting the names on the tournament pamphlet he was holding. What exactly is the coincidence? The Kazekage broke the brief but distinctly awkward silence by saying, "Masahiro is a renegade ninja from my village," while the Amekage stoically stared forward, unwilling to respond. Rather than sending him back to my village to face charges, the Amekage here chose to allow him to join Akatsuki. Technically speaking, I'm currently witnessing a fight between two of my own ninja. However, that is now resolved, isn't it? To make matters worse, Gaara and Masahiro have a very sad past together, if you believe it. They must have come here to fight today for no other reason than fate. The crowd waited in increasing expectation of the next fight, hoping it would be even bloodier than the first, as Genma intervened between the two fighters as they reached the middle of the arena to reiterate the rules. With a note of excitement in his voice, the Cage went on, "I promise you, this will be very exciting to watch. Lord Hokage, is there any chance you could bring out a pot of tea before the match starts? I have a rather dry throat." Obviously, the Chunin behind him must have been ready for such a request, because within the minute the Chunin came out of the back room with a fresh kettle and 3 cups for the distinguished Cage, the Hokage said, raising his hand and gesturing for them to carry out the order. The Chunin poured a cup for the Cage, who accepted it with gratitude, and for the Hokage, who did the same, but the young leader stopped the Chunin before he could pour when he reached the Amekage. He dismissed him, folding his hands back on his lap and waving him away. "Not for me, thank you," he said. With his cup in hand, the Cage leaned forward and glared at the Amekage, saying, "Oh, Lord Amekage, hurry up. Do you genuinely question the Hokage's moral character in his own house? Should he have intended to poison us, wouldn't he have done it first?" The Cage sipped the tea and shook his head appreciatively, seemingly to demonstrate his sincerity. Good stuff as usual." The Hokage nodded in agreement and also took a sip of the tea. If I may add, it was a lot better than the batch we had this morning. However, Lord Cage, please refrain from bothering the Amekage. While he is in my village, he is allowed to drink whatever he wants." With an unreadable expression on his face, the Amekage's dark spiral gaze briefly flicked between the two other leaders before saying, "I apologize if that's what it seems like to you. As you know, I'm a cautious man who rarely plays with fate. I'll go by." Their focus swiftly shifted to the arena when Genma told the crowd, "Start the next battle between Masahiro of the Red Sand and Gaara of the Desert."
I will continue the story in next part. Till then, we weeb offline.